Chapter 281, Fairy Tale's First Magic Tournament, Update 1. All 300 magic crystals have been transported to the Mirror Realm, Urza announced, landing at the guild's entrance with the enchanted mirror firmly in hand. She'd fulfilled Lucian's orders without a hitch. From his position near the gate, Master Makarov called out, "Lucian, lead the way. We must find Laxus." Under Lucian's tracking spell, more than 100 fairy tale wizards poured out of the guild, their faces set with fierce determination. Inside Cartier Cathedral's inner sanctum, Freed approached Laxus with a measured stride. "The guild's protective ward has been shattered," he reported. Urza secured every crystal from the Temple of God's Call and sealed them inside the mirror. A flicker of relief crossed Freed's features. "If we'd resorted to all-out war with the Magic Council's magisters, it would have backfired spectacularly. And if we'd really opened the Hall of Divine Invocation and slaughtered everyone, we'd never forgive ourselves." He paused, then added, "The barrier is down. Master Makarov is already on the move." Laxus nodded. The first gambit had been played, and now the real contest began. "I'm afraid this isn't a fight we can win." Begusro straightened the straps on his helmet and adjusted the 5 miniature puppets at his side. His face was grim. They had always prided themselves on their boldness, but charging 100-plus strong force of mages led by the guild master himself was another matter entirely. Fairy Tale was no shadowy clan like the Soul of the Corpse, which they'd once dispatched without breaking a sweat. Here stood S-Class Urza Scarlet, along with masters like Grey Fullbuster, Natsu Dragneel, Gajeel Red Fox, and Juvia Loxer. A formidable feline mage, rumored to rival even the Holy Ten's might, prowled at their flank. And though Fairy Tale's rank and file were no pushovers, they lacked one key asset, Elba Green, whose petrifying stare could turn friend and foe alike to stone. Laxus's eyes flared. Thunder crackled around him in jagged arcs. "This is all your fault," he roared at Begusro. "If we fall here, that good-for-nothing old man, every guild member, and every citizen of Magnolia will be lost too." Lucian trembled as raw lightning crackled across his skin. His frame swelled, muscles knotting beneath faint draconic scales, and his canines lengthened into sharp fangs. He drew his hands together at chest level and a piercing white light burst forth. In an instant, the entire city of Magnolia was bathed in the glow of a vast, intricate magic circle floating overhead. Super magic fairy law. As Makarov's grandson, Lucian had long harbored ambitions of seizing the guildmaster's seat. He saw the weak among Fairy Tale as dead weight, liabilities that needed to be purged if the guild were ever to become truly invincible. He'd spent years mastering the greatest spells in the guild's archives, convinced that only by eliminating every unworthy member could he prove both his own worth and his grandfather's mistake in exiling his father. Yet every carefully laid plan had unraveled in failure. Doubt gnawed at him, and frustration twisted his heart. At last, driven to the brink, Lucian made one desperate decision: to destroy them all. Below the magic circle, the main thoroughfare leading to the Chaldea Cathedral was packed with guild members, mere streets away from the cathedral's towering spires. In the moment that white light flared, every face turned upward in shock. This is fairy law? Lucian's actually using it. What does he intend? To kill us all?" A cold rage clenched Makarov's heart. The old master's face went ashen, his eyes blazing with a storm of anger and betrayal, as the law he himself had taught became a weapon of ultimate destruction. But the next instant, Makarov's face went blank. Then he broke into laughter. Lucian frowned in confusion. "President, is something wrong with his magic?" He'd heard that the Super Goblin's law could instantly fell any member of the Holy Ten at the same rank, and he had no desire to test that rumor firsthand. His original plan had been to open a mirror portal and spirit everyone away to safety. But Makarov's sudden reaction made it clear that something unexpected was happening. Makarov shook his head, relief softening his stern features. "Nothing's wrong with the spell itself. Even if I'd cast it, it would be just as potent. But don't worry, it won't harm us or any of the townspeople." He paused to choose his words carefully. "The Super Goblin's Law is one of our guild's 3 greatest magics, a legendary spell that uses sacred light to vanquish darkness. It automatically strikes any foe the caster truly regards as an enemy in his heart. If the magician doesn't internally identify someone as a true enemy, the spell simply won't affect them. That's exactly what happened. Lucian and the other mages exchanged glances, realization dawning on them all as Makarov's words sank in. Though Laxus had unleashed fairy law over the entire town, he didn't truly see his fellow guild members or the townspeople as enemies. At his core, he remained loyal to Fairy Tale, untouched by the darkness that had claimed his father. Makarov's relieved smile spoke volumes. Laxus was all bluster, not a lost son consumed by evil. Lucian lifted his gaze to the enormous magic circle hovering overhead, its runes blazing in a cascade of light. His heart pounded for a moment, but every fiber of his being told him he wasn't in grave danger. As the radiance faded, the circle dissolved into the evening sky, and nobody around him bore so much as a scratch. Laxus lowered his arms, his golden eyes wide with confusion. "How?" he muttered, voice strained. "Why didn't anyone get hurt? That's not how fairy law is supposed to work." He glanced around at the unscathed faces of his comrades, struggling to reconcile the unstoppable force of his power with the gentle outcome it had produced. Freed glanced at Laxus, his expression torn. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward. "Laxus," he began, voice steady, "you've forgotten how the fairy law works. It only binds those you truly consider enemies. If you see someone as a comrade, it simply won't touch them. You didn't just inherit Master Makarov's power, you inherited his loyalty to his guildmates. Admit what you've done, face the Master, and end this now." "Laxus, please," Biggs added, his booming tone betraying uncertainty. "You don't have to go any further." But Laxus's eyes blazed. He unleashed a deafening roar as crackling electricity surged over his flesh. In an instant, a torrent of lightning slammed into Freed and Biggs, hurling them across the rubble-strewn floor. "No," Laxus snarled. "I refuse to see those weaklings as friends. Anyone who stands in my way is my enemy, and I'll crush them all. With or without the fairy law, I will prevail." "Laxus, stop this madness." Before his words had even faded, the great wooden doors of the church exploded inward. A colossal fist shattered the entrance, sending Laxus hurtling backward. Dust and splinters rained down as Master Makarov strode in, flanked by the entire guild. Their gazes, filled with disappointment and resolve, fell upon him. "Very well. Then fight! I'll see every last one of you wiped off the face of this guild." At the edge of the hall, Makarov's thunderous proclamation hung in the air. He glared at his grandson, Laxus, whose jaw was set with the stubbornness of a stone pillar. Just as the old man stepped forward, ready to unleash another tirade, Lucian held up a hand to halt him. "Master," Lucian said, his voice calm but urgent, "I've got an idea." Makarov blinked, surprised. He knew from experience that scolding Laxus would only stoke the younger mage's rebellious fires. Lucian pressed on, seizing the moment. "What if we organized the very first fairy tale magic tournament? We'd give everyone a chance to prove themselves and channel all that energy into something positive." Laxus's stern expression softened for a split second as he considered the proposal. A tournament? Now that was Sorcerer, oathing to challenge even the toughest among them. Makarov studied his grandson's face, then nodded slowly. "I like it," he admitted. "Very well, let the tournament begin." Chapter 282, Ancient Magic, Mountain Moving Spell, Second Update. Huh? At Lucian's words, Makarov froze. So did the rest of the Fairy Tale Guild, and even Laxus, who had been bracing himself to storm the stage, stopped dead in his tracks. "What, is the first magic tournament of Fairy Tale?" Makarov finally managed to ask, peering at Lucian with furrowed brows. Lucian folded his arms and met the old master's gaze steadily. "The first magic tournament is a friendly competition we'll host inside the guild to crown our strongest wizard. Since our beauty pageant was abruptly interrupted today, the townspeople and visitors have been gossiping, worried something terrible has happened to us. We can use the tournament as an official explanation for the confusion. We're preparing the inaugural Fairy Tale Magic Tournament. That will reassure everyone we're fine." He continued, eyes bright with excitement. "Going forward, we'll hold the Fairy Tale First Magic Tournament every Harvest Festival afternoon to determine our strongest member for the year. In the evenings, we'll follow it up with a grand magic parade through Magnolia's streets. It'll be a celebration for the whole town. Residents will have something to cheer about, and travelers will flock here to watch." Laxus, arms still tense at his sides, blinked and slowly relaxed. So, instead of chaos, it'll look like we planned a festival all along. Lucian nodded. Exactly, no one needs to know about the unexpected hiccup that happened earlier. By the time our parade's over, everyone will be too busy gawking at dazzling spells to remember anything else. Makarov rubbed his chin, a slow smile spreading across his face. I must admit, this is an ingenious way to turn a blunder into an event. Fairy Tale always finds a way to surprise people. With that, the Guildmaster gave Lucian a hearty nod. Very well. Let's announce the first magic tournament. Today. A ripple of excitement spread through the assembled guild members. Even Laxus cracked a grin as Lucian strode forward to the guild's notice board, ready to transform today's chaos into Magnolia's most spectacular annual tradition. Laxus, don't you want to prove yourself first? Then take up the guild presidency and lead Fairy Tale to its true heights? Before you can claim the right to succeed Master Makarov, you need to become the guild's strongest wizard. Otherwise, what credentials will you have to stand at the helm and promise to make us unbeatable? I, Lucian, spoke those words with a clear purpose. My proposal served 3 goals. First and foremost, by pushing Laxus to surpass everyone else in power, I would indirectly cement my own path to leadership. After all, Fairy Tale's ultimate arsenal lies in its 3 legendary supermagics, known collectively as the Law, of which Fairy Law is only one. Master Makarov knows just that single spell. The other 2 remain beyond his reach. In history, only Mavis Vermilion, the guild's founder, its first master, and honored fairy tactician, ever mastered all 3. And by custom and rule, only the sitting master of Fairy Tale may learn the complete set of these supreme magics. If I truly aim to unlock their full potential, I cannot settle for anything less than the presidency itself. Lucian leaned forward, addressing the gathered guildmasters with quiet confidence. Secondly, he began, this plan lets us resolve the Laxus situation without an all-out brawl, yet still ends with him expelled from Fairy Tale. And make no mistake, we can't afford to lose him entirely. His power rivals the 10 wizard saints. As future guildmaster, I need to think like a leader. We have to find a way to keep Laxus here, to bolster our strength rather than weaken it. The recent use of fairy law worked in our favor. It showed everyone that Laxus's defiance springs from pride more than malice. Deep down, he still cares about this guild, and that gives us leverage. Finally, point 3. We turn this conflict into a grand tournament. A formal challenge open to every member will raise Fai Tale's reputation, push everyone to train harder, and restore unity. In short, it's a win-win for our future. Before Master Makarov could reply, Natsu sprang to his feet, fists clenched and eyes blazing. Count me in. I've been dying for a rematch with you, Lucian, he declared, already bouncing on the balls of his feet with barely contained excitement. Gray shrugged out of his clothes, flashing a confident grin. If this is a competition, count me in. That's exactly what a man should say, someone cheered. Ha! Who's afraid of whom? Gray taunted, already stepping forward. After years of fighting side by side in Fairy Tale, a friendly sparring match was the least of their concerns. The moment Lucian floated the idea, nearly every guildmate squared their shoulders, primed for action. Only 2 held back, Lucy, who doubted her own strength, and Kana, who'd rather be sampling wine than trading blows. Master Makarov paused, uncertain. Then Lucian slipped him a private note. This challenge could give Laxus an honorable exit from the growing tension. With that reassurance, Makarov smiled and gave his blessing. Laxus remained silent, his gaze sweeping the room. Finally, he lifted his head and spoke in a low, steady voice. If I prove I'm the strongest wizard here, will you make me guildmaster? Lucian answered without hesitation. If you demonstrate you're the most powerful mage in Fairy Tale, I won't stand in your way. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Today's display might have been extreme, but the law of fairies had revealed Laxus's true resolve, and now the guild was ready to test his strength. Lucian was Makarov's grandson, and in Fairy Tale, that meant respect followed him wherever he went. If Lucian truly was the guild's strongest mage, no one would balk at him succeeding as guildmaster someday. Still, for now, it was clear in everyone's hearts that Lucian remained the front-runner. He'd led them to victory more times than anyone could count, and he had an uncanny knack for cleaning up every crisis. Mature, level-headed, dependable, he was exactly the kind of leader they wanted. Makarov studied him with a furrowed brow. "Lucian," he said hesitantly, "are you certain you can take on Laxus? He's the Thunder Dragon Slayer. Your lightning magic won't even touch him." Lucian met his grandfather's gaze calmly. "Don't worry, Master," he replied. "I wouldn't take the stage unless I was absolutely sure of my strategy." At that, relief washed over Makarov's lined face. He straightened his robes and cleared his throat so that the room fell silent. "All right," he announced with solemn authority. "Here's the deal. The champion of Fairy Tale's first magic tournament will be named Vice Guildmaster, the designated successor to the presidency. Laxus, if you claim this title, the Guildmaster's chair will be yours. If you fail, you must apologize to everyone in the guild, stop causing trouble, and carry out your missions properly." "Grandpa Makarov, that's the deal." Laxus snapped the crackling lightning back into his palm, picked up his coat, and draped it over his shoulders. He cast a proud look around the guild hall. "Then I'll make sure the whole town knows I'm Fairy Tale's strongest wizard and claim the Guildmaster's seat in grand fashion." Freed and Bixlow, still tingling from the shock, exchanged relieved glances. There was no beating Laxus in his current state, and they'd much rather see him rise legitimately than slaughter everyone here. If it came to bloodshed, they'd resign and start a new guild of their own. "Master," Freed spoke up, "if first place takes over as Guildmaster, shouldn't the second and third place finishers receive rewards too?" At that moment, Lucian stepped forward with another proposal. "Why not let every member of the guild compete? Give everyone a chance to prove themselves." For once, Makarov's eyes twinkled with approval. "An excellent suggestion, Lucian. As long as you finish in the top 10, you'll walk away with prize money. Second place gets 200,000 guild coins, third place 100,000, and everyone from 4th through 10th receives 50,000 each." Makarov cleared his throat. Originally, the Fairy Tale pageant champion was promised 500,000, but thanks to Laxus's shenanigans and the contest's abrupt cancellation, he only needs to contribute 350,000. With Lucian shoring up our coffers, the guild treasury is anything but broke, so the total 850,000 isn't going to break us. He paused. "Now, about the venue." Before he could continue, Lucian raised a hand. "I've got this. If we let a full-scale tournament loose inside the guild hall, or even aboard our moving castle, it'll tear the place apart. We need a site large enough for everyone to compete freely, and it should be visible to the entire town. Fortunately, I know just the spell." Lucian closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath, channeling his mana downward. The surface of Magnolia's central lake trembled, then heaved like a living thing. Earth and rock surged upward, coalescing into a broad island at the water's center. Vines and wildflowers sprouted along its shores as stones rolled into place, forming natural grandstands. He opened his eyes, a satisfied grin on his face. There, a perfect arena, spacious, secure, and easy for everyone in town to watch. No risk to the guild hall, and all we had to do was borrow a bit of ancient magic, the Mountain Mover's spell. Chapter 283, The Island in the Center of the Lake. Lucy and Kana had no intention of entering the competition until they heard about the handsome prize on offer. Excitement overcame caution, and before long, they were both signed up, chattering eagerly about the challenges ahead. Meanwhile, Lucian and Master Makarov gathered outside the guild hall to run through the final rules. With a nod of mutual understanding, Lucian strapped on his mechanical wings and lifted off, Makarov gliding close behind. They soared over the rooftops and out into the rolling countryside, heading for a gently sloping hill that overlooked the sparkling expanse of the Great Lake. Lucian landed lightly on its crest, scanning the horizon for any distractions. Today's task wasn't to vanquish opponents, but to reshape the land itself, no small feat, even for a talented mage. Drawing his wand, Lucian cast his gaze over the hillside. "Mountain Shift," he intoned, invoking the ancient incantation taught to him by Archmage Dumbledore. The spell was reliable, but notoriously slow to weave. In a pitched battle, its creeping tempo made it impractical. Here, however, speed was secondary. Stone and earth responded to his will, trembling beneath his feet as cracks fanned out across the slope. With a low, rumbling roar, the hill began to detach from its foundations. Huge chunks of rock and turf peeled away, suspended midair by the sheer pull of Lucian's magic. He guided the floating mass over the water, his concentration absolute as the island drifted toward the lake's center. Once positioned, he released the final surge of power. The new landform settled into place with a thunderous splash, sending waves rippling across the surface. When the water calmed, a lush green isle stood where only open water had been moments before. Trees and grasses, gathered up in that single lift of earth, brushed the breeze as if freshly planted by nature herself. Lucian lowered his wand and surveyed his handiwork with quiet pride. The arena for today's grand contest was ready, an island in the heart of the lake, floating like a jewel under the midday sun. Lucian hovered dozens of feet above the ground, his wand still glowing. He took a deep breath and spoke the final syllable of the incantation. Rise! Immediately, the small hill before him trembled. Soil and grass shivered as the earth peeled upward, roots breaking free from the ground. In moments, the entire mound floated steadily into the sky. Lucian adjusted his grip on the wand, letting a soft current of wind magic bloom from the tip, guiding the hill's ascent. Wings unfurling behind him, he flapped once, then twice, steering the levitating landmass toward the great lake beside the town. As he passed over the marketplace, Lucian realized something unsettling. If cast too slowly, the mountain-moving spell would merely displace its target. But with full force, it could wreck an entire settlement. He pictured the hillside plummeting onto rooftops below. The devastation would rival that of the most powerful super spells. On the streets underneath, townsfolk and visiting merchants gaped upward. Tourists froze mid-step, their mouths agape. A few children clutched their parents' skirts, trembling. A merchant hurriedly closed his stall, muttering, "Is this some harvest festival spectacle?" Another voice cried, "What kind of magic is that?" Clearing his throat, Lucian called down in a firm but calm voice. "Everyone, please remain calm. I am Lucian of the Fairy Tale Guild. I assure you, none of you will be harmed." A few onlookers exchanged confused glances, uncertain whether to be relieved or more alarmed. Lucian swept a reassuring smile over the crowd. Then, with a gentle flick of his wand, he lowered the floating hill to a safe distance above the lake. Ripples danced across the water's surface as it came to rest, and tension in the air eased, at least for now. At 2 o'clock this afternoon, Fairy Tale will hold its inaugural wizard conference on the island in the lake to crown the guild's strongest mage. Lucian raised his voice with a loudspeaker spell, letting it boom across town. "If you're interested, come to the shore to watch and cheer for our wizards." With the announcement out of the way, he levitates a massive chunk of the hillside and lowers it gently above the water near the shore. Plasma electromagnetic cannon. The spell ignites into a crackling column of searing energy that slices clean through the rock, removing its upper half and revealing a broad, circular platform suspended above the lake. In mere moments, the arena is ready. Lucian decides against any elaborate decoration. Illusions or trappings would be torn to shreds once the fights begin. There are no grandstands on the island itself. Instead, townspeople will line the shoreline. This way, everyone watches safely from dry ground, and the guild's wizards can unleash their full power without hesitation. As soon as Lucian's announcement echoed across town, residents and tourists alike broke into excited chatter and hurried down to the lakeshore. When they saw him summon an island in the center of the lake, jaws dropped in astonishment at the raw power on display. Ordinary citizens knew that wizards were formidable, but they had never imagined magic so potent it could literally raise mountains. Even within the ranks of Fairy Tale, veteran mages stood speechless. They had witnessed Natsu's explosive outbursts and Urza's earth-shattering strikes, but never magic that could form a mountain from nothing, levitate it through the air, then guide it to its target before letting it crash down. Not even Master Makarov could match this feat. In his giant form, he possessed the strength to heft enormous boulders, yet that hardly compared to lifting an entire mountain and carrying it on his shoulders. Lucian's demonstration had redefined the boundaries of what a wizard could achieve. Lucian heaved a massive chunk of mountain free from the earth as if it were a clump of dirt. Impossible. No solid rock should yield like that. This mage, He grows more inscrutable by the minute, Laxus muttered, narrowing his eyes as Lucian appeared in the guild hall with a shimmer of teleportation magic. Laxus had always assumed his only true rival here was Mistgang. Their duels were legendary for their ferocity and mystery. Lucian, on the other hand, had seemed a simple lightning specialist, and as a Thunder Dragon Slayer, Laxus could neutralize any bolt Lucian threw at him. He'd never regarded the newcomer as a genuine threat. But after what he'd just witnessed, and after seeing the Guildmaster's unwavering faith in Lucian, Laxus felt a new unease settle in his chest. Perhaps this young mage was destined to surpass them all. Laxus stepped forward, a wry smile curling at his lips. "You're more capable than I first believed, Lucian. If I come out on top, you'll be mine, my personal cat, so to speak." Lucian perched on the edge of the raised platform and gave a playful, cat-like stretch. "You're worthy of being my match," he teased, then arched an eyebrow and added, "Compliments can wait until after you've beaten me." With that, he swapped his grin for a formal nod toward Master Makarov. "The ring's ready. Please, bring them in." Makarov cleared his throat and raised his voice so every member of Fairy Tale could hear. "Here's how it's going to work. Everyone draws lots in pairs. Winners advance to the next round until only one champion remains. Knock your opponent unconscious, force them to surrender, or they're eliminated. Simple enough. Give it your all." A ripple of excitement ran through the assembled wizards. Natsu clenched his fists, eyes blazing. "This time, I'll take down Laxus and claim the title of strongest wizard." Laxus cracked a confident smile in reply. "First, you'll have to get past me, Natsu," Gajeel chimed in from the back. "Don't count us out either." As the chatter swelled, Lucian leaned toward Makarov and spoke quietly. "What about Jelal and Mistagan? Aren't they joining in?" Makarov shook his head. "I contacted Jelal through the magic crystal. He said he's already faced you before and won't compete. And Mistagan? You know he'd never show up for a tournament." With that, the gates swung open, and the first pair of contenders stepped into the ring. The Grand Magic Games had begun. Lucian hated being in the spotlight. Normally, Mr. Gang would cast a sleep spell to keep any onlookers from following them back to the guild, let alone letting the whole town watch them compete on the island. "Relax," Mr. Gang said with a grin. "This competition is voluntary." Lucian simply nodded. With a casual wave of his hand, he channeled his magnetism, drawing iron-rich sand from deep underground and compressing it into a massive iron platform. "Everyone, climb on. I'll ferry you over." He'd honed his strength to bear more than 10 tons, so carrying the group was effortless. As they glided across the water toward the island, the villagers lining the shore burst into warm applause and cheers. Chapter 284. Poor Natsu. "Everyone, gather round. Let's draw lots." Makarov set down a lacquered wooden box and smiled at the assembled wizards. Inside it lay 110 tokens, arranged into 55 matching pairs. Each pair bore the same number, and whoever drew the same number would face each other in the first round. Competitors stepped up one by one. When it was Lucian's turn, he slipped his hand into the box and withdrew a token. He unfolded the parchment and read aloud, "Number 23. Lucian scanned the crowd until he spotted another wizard holding a 23 token. With a polite nod, he approached. The other man's face drained of color. "Of course I'd draw Lucian," he groaned. "My luck just went out the window." Murmurs rippled through the arena as more participants revealed their matchups. Wizards who had drawn the numbers beside Laxus, Urza, the Thunder God, and Natsu all let out dismayed sighs. No one relished the idea of going up against Fairy Tale's heavy hitters. High above the roped-off rings, Mira Jane hovered on a gust of white magic, microphone in hand. "All right, everyone," she called cheerfully. "Please make your way to the arena that matches your number." Having opted out of the tournament herself, Mira Jane was serving as this year's MC. She floated from spot to spot, directing contestants to their designated rings as the first round of matches prepared to begin. The mountaintop arena Lucian had summoned was vast. Mira Jane swept her magic pen through the air, sketching 55 glowing rings, one for each competitor, so everyone could battle simultaneously in their own circle. This tournament had been Lucian's last-minute idea, so it was kept simple. Next year's event would be far more elaborate. But for now, none of that mattered. After all, these were all wizards from the same guild, friends who knew each other well, and it was just a friendly contest. Most mages understood their own limits. They knew the championship was out of reach, and even a top 10 finish seemed unlikely. Except for a handful, everyone was taking it in good spirits. One of the few who wasn't, however, was Lucy. She desperately needed a bonus for her rent, and that meant cracking the top 10. As she stepped forward to draw her lot, her hand shook with nerves. She prayed she wouldn't pull Lucian or Laxus and face a brutal first-round matchup. First round of the preliminaries. Go. One by one, the contenders took their places on the raised platform, each standing beside the number that marked their match. Cheers and applause thundered in from the crowded stands built along the shoreline, and Mirajane's clear voice carried over the roar through a handheld microphone. "Contestants, ready?" she called. "Begin." A crackle of anticipation split the air. Instantly, Lucian, formerly known as George, flashed forward. In a single fluid motion, he raised his wand, murmured the incantation, and sent a bolt of stinging violet light skidding under his rival's guard. The other wizard went down hard before he could even draw breath. With Lucian's current magic rank, bolstered by the enchanted wand at his side, anyone below S-class was virtually helpless against a direct stun spell. Unless they possessed a rare constitution or equally potent magic, a single hit spelled defeat. Lucian barely had time to straighten when a thunderous boom split the air from the next platform. He glanced to his right and saw Laxus, crackling with raw electricity, unleashing a cascade of lightning that reduced his opponent to a smoking heap. Across the arena, similar displays of power played out. Urza summoned her summons in an instant, pinning her competitor under a mountain of spectral steel. Natsu roared and blasted his foe with a fusion flame punch. Gray encased his adversary in ice before shattering the block to end the fight. Most preliminary matches wrapped up in under a minute. For ordinary mages, enduring even a handful of direct hits was out of the question. They'd fall unconscious or be driven out of the ring long before they could mount any real offense. Only some, one like Natsu, with his near-dragon resilience, could shrug off repeated assaults and keep fighting. Lucian took a steadying breath. This was just the start. If the next rounds were anything like this one, he'd need every ounce of focus and every scrap of magical power he possessed. The preliminary round was over in less than 10 minutes. Mirajane's voice echoed through the arena. 30-minute break. Regain your strength and mana. We'll begin the second round draw when time's up. Not everyone could dispatch an opponent in one move like Lucian, who seemed to expend almost no energy with his stun spell. After 30 minutes, the 55 victors returned to the entrance hall and formed a line. The defeated mages took their seats in the stands, cheering and speculating about the upcoming matchups. This time, there would be 27 duels and one lucky bye. One by one, please, Mirajane called, and each winner stepped forward to draw a numbered token. Finally, Lucy approached the urn. She closed her eyes, dipped her hand in, and withdrew a slip of paper. She unfolded it, grinning ear to ear. Number 28. Yes! I've got the bye! A wave of excitement swept over her. Skipping straight to round 3 meant that a single victory there would place her among the top 14, and right on the doorstep of the prize purse. Meanwhile, on the adjacent field, Lucian was already locked in his next duel. He raised his staff with calm precision, whispered the incantation, and unleashed a surge of emerald light. His opponent's eyes fluttered shut mid-spell as he crumpled to the ground. "Another one-shot knockout," someone in the crowd exclaimed. No challenger who wasn't as fast as Lucian could hope to dodge that lightning-quick stun rune. Mirajane tapped her microphone. Just like that, Lucian advances to round 3. And Lucy, congratulations, you'll be waiting for him there. Prepare yourselves. Lucian tapped the back of his head with his wand to dispel the stun spell. Change attire, Flame Emperor armor. No sooner had he finished re-equipping himself than a shout rose from the ring at center stage. A slow smile curved his lips as he swept through the air toward the commotion. Poor Natsu. This round's draw had paired two of the tournament's heaviest hitters, Natsu and Urza, against each other. There was nothing anyone could do. The brackets were determined by pure chance. Even a first-round matchup against Laxus had been a real possibility. In this competition, only the champion could claim an undisputed victory. Every other result depended as much on luck as on raw power. Now, in the second round, one of them had to fall. Lucian was betting on Natsu. Time and again, Natsu displayed unbelievable strength when facing true enemies, yet when he fought beneath Fairy Tail's banner, or worse, against one of their own, he seemed to hold back. And nobody rattled him more than Urza, who had beaten him since childhood and left him with a well of doubt. When he stepped into the ring with her today, Lucian knew Natsu's flame would burn far less brightly than usual. Lucian's misfortune seemed unshakable, and not for lack of skill. His first matchup was grueling. For over 20 minutes, he traded blows with Natsu Dragneel, before finally conceding defeat. Still, their duel set the arena alight, igniting the crowd into roaring approval. After a half-hour intermission, the tournament progressed to its third round. 14 arenas and 28 combatants remained. Everyone else watched from the stands. Excitement crackled through the air as names of legendary wizards filled the draw. Alba Green, the feared thunder god whose eyes could petrify, would face Elfman Strauss, the man who had ascended to Beast King status after the Phantom War. Grey Fullbuster, master of ice style, was pitted against Bigusro, one of the tournament's other thunder gods. Levi McGarden, Lucian's trusted friend, would take the field against Gajiel Redfox, the iron-jawed dragon slayer who'd once launched a savage attack on her, only to be driven back. And at last, Lucian himself drew Juvia Loxer, an S-class enchantress and former member of the Dark Phantom Guild. A murmur ran through the crowd at Juvia's name. She'd fallen hopelessly in love with Grey Fullbuster the first time she saw him, and her devotion had led her to join the Fairy Tail Guild in a bid for his affection. Now she faced Lucian with a single resolve, to give Grey the brightest, most dazzling performance he'd ever witnessed. As Lucian left the drawing hall and made his way to Arena 12, he steeled himself for the challenge ahead. With each step, the cheers and anticipation of thousands pressed in on him, reminding him that luck might fail. Talent, however, would prevail. Juvia refused to back down against Lucian. She immediately shifted into her water form, nullifying any chance of his physical strikes landing. Though she'd crossed blades with him during the Phantom battle and at the Tower of Paradise, she knew she was still outmatched. "Waterbind," she shouted, and a churning column of water erupted from the ground, wrapping Lucian completely from the ankles up. Lucian barely had time to register Juvia's move before a swirling sphere of water shot out from her palm and encased him. Its crushing pressure held him fast in midair, cutting off breath and will alike. He was completely immobilized. "Water flow restraint," Juvia called triumphantly, her eyes glittering as the prison of water solidified around him. Lucian felt the water's weight crushing in, but he didn't panic. As Juvia raised her arms, forming a dozen razor-sharp water blades aimed straight at him, Lucian's lips curved into a wry smile. Phantom shift. In a heartbeat, he vanished from the sphere's center and reappeared behind Juvia, deftly evading every spinning blade. "You!" Juvia whirled around, but Lucian was already gathering crackling energy at his fingertips. The air shimmered with electric blue arcs that danced across his skin like living lightning. 700 million volts, he shouted, his voice echoing through the broken courtyard. He thrust his palm forward. The lightning leapt from his hand and traced the water on the ground, the very same water he'd used moments before to imprison him, snaking up Juvia's legs. Water may shrug off ordinary attacks, but it was vulnerable to lightning. The current surged through her fluid form, dispersing her watery body in a cascade of sparks. Juvia let out a gurgling cry as the electricity ripped her apart, forcing her back into solid flesh. She collapsed to her knees, drenched and trembling, her once steady magic shattered by Lucian's counterstrike. Lucian lowered his hand, the residual crackle of electricity fading in the sudden silence. He stared down at Juvia, every muscle poised and ready, victorious, yet vigilant, for the battle was far from over. Water whip. Juvia clenched her teeth against the jolts of electric pain, shaping the water at her command into a whip that lashed toward Lucian. She aimed to hold him in place and stop the current surging from his body. But Lucian's form shimmered with crackling blue light, and small and cat-like though he was, he moved with lightning speed. He slipped past her whip and appeared directly in front of her. "Sorry, Juvia." With a swift flick, Lucian raised his magic wand and tapped her lightly on the forehead. Faint! Juvia's eyes fluttered shut, and she crumpled to the floor immediately. Ring 8 goes to Lucian. Mirajane's triumphant voice rang out as she floated above the arena, announcing the victor. From the stands, defeated members of Fairy Tail stirred with excitement. Juvia is S-class, one wizard muttered, but he made short work of her. I knew Lucian was strong, another added, but he's only gotten better since the Phantom fight. Back then he was impressive, but now he's on a whole new level. Few in Fairy Tail had witnessed the Paradise Tower incident firsthand. Their last memory of Lucian's power dated to his battle against Phantom, and though that duel was remarkable, this match made it clear he'd grown even more formidable since then. It was obvious at a glance that these fighters weren't on the same level at all. Once Lucian lifted Juvia's sleeping spell, he settled in to watch the other arenas. Laxus, true to his fearsome reputation, cut down opponent after opponent with a single devastating strike. In this round he faced Sarusuk of the Levi faction, an impressive challenger to be sure, but Laxus's power was simply overwhelming. One move, one defeat. Alba Green's match was next, against Elfman. Thanks to a petrifying glare, Elfman was forced to fight blind, relying on muscle memory rather than sight. Alba, able to soar above him, rained stone shrapnel from the air until Elfman himself turned to stone and fell. Then came the bout between Levi and Gajiel. Although Levi ultimately claimed victory, Lucian couldn't shake the feeling that Gajiel had held back. What motive lay behind his restraint? That remained one of the tournament's most intriguing mysteries. The longest, most hard-fought clash unfolded between Gray and Begusro. Neither combatant would yield. They unleashed spell after spell until both were utterly spent, collapsing in a heap as the last of their magic fizzled out. With neither able to continue, the judges declared the match a draw, and sadly, eliminated them both due to the severity of their injuries. When the smoke cleared, 13 competitors had earned their spots in the semifinals. They were Lucian, Laxus, Urza, Alba Green, Levi, Freed, Kana, Macau, Wakaba, Biska, Arzak, Walian, and Lucy. Lucian watched with quiet approval as Lucy also secured her place among the top 13. In his eyes, she was still a force to be reckoned with, though she never gave herself enough credit. Even without counting other star spirits, Aquarius and Leo alone would easily rate S-level in most guilds. In a true contest, Lucian was certain Lucy could break into the guild's top 10. Today, however, she didn't need to fight at all. In the fourth-round draw, she earned a bye, vaulting her straight into the top 7. Natsu, guess what? Lucy bounded over to where Natsu was propped against a wall, looking thoroughly dejected after his loss to Urza in round 2. I'm in the top 7. That bonus is 50,000. Rent for next month is already covered. Natsu gave a hollow laugh. Who told you not to crash in the guild's free dorm instead of renting? Lucy shrugged, grinning. I like living on my own, more freedom that way. She spotted the slump of his shoulders and softened. Hey, don't beat yourself up. Losing to Urza is nothing to be ashamed of. She clapped him lightly on the back, and even Natsu managed a small, reluctant smile. That's Urza. The harpy perched beside Natsu pulled a fish from his small pack, munching as he grumbled. They've got some kind of bond. In the fourth round, 6 battles raged at once. Lucian's opponent was Walian Lako, a telepathy mage of only moderate skill. Before long, Lucian ended the match with a single decisive strike. Telepathy magic functions much like psychic power, allowing its user to read thoughts and transmit voice within a limited radius. Unfortunately for Walian, Lucian's own formidable psychic gifts, paired with his mental cloaking, rendered him entirely unreadable. Lucian found telepathy fascinating. He was convinced that mastering it would further amplify his psychic abilities and enhance his soul-reading technique. After his return from the 100 Years quest, he fully intended to add telepathy magic to his studies. With his match over, Lucian settled in to watch the remaining arenas. When the dust settled on the 4th round, the final 7 competitors emerged. Lucian, Laxus, Urza, Alba Green, Freed, Kana, and Lucy. True to form, Laxus and the Thunder Gods had proven themselves exceptionally powerful. The list of advancing combatants was clean except for Begusro and Gray, both of whom had withdrawn injured. Everyone else, including Alba Green and Freed, moved on without much trouble. Now it was time for the 5th round pairings. The brackets were called. Laxus versus Kana, Urza versus Alba Green, Lucian versus Freed. Lucy again drew a bye. Lucy clapped her hands in delight. I must be favored by the goddess of luck today. Her cheer rang through the hall just as Laxus and Kana took the field. Within seconds, Laxus's thunder magic overwhelmed Kana's defenses, and he claimed the victory. Next up, Urza squared off against Alba Green. Everyone expected a hard fight. Alba's petrifying gaze was notorious, but Urza calmly revealed a crystallized false eye capable of negating petrification. A few well-placed strikes later, Alba stood defeated, forced to acknowledge who truly ruled the field. That left just one match before the final four, Lucian versus Freed. Freed strode forward, his Western magic sword humming at his side. He offered Lucian a cold smile. You may not have made S-Class within the guild, he said, but I've cut down more than one S-Class black wizard outside it. His ambition was no secret. If Freed beat Lucian, then Laxus would sail to the championship and secure the presidency of the guild. As for Lucian's luck, mere trifles, he thought, nothing worth Freed's attention. But Lucian met him evenly, resolve shining in his eyes. This battle would decide more than just a place in the next round. It would determine the balance of power in the entire guild. Urza's power, though it far exceeded his expectations, enough to overwhelm Alba Green, was still no match for Laxus. What truly unnerved him was Lucian's unfathomable strength. From Lucian's razor-sharp strategic mind to the mountain-shifting, landscape-cleaving magic he'd just unleashed, it was clear he was at least S-Class, and one of its most elite. Against such overwhelming power, Laxus faced a genuine threat. Chapter 286, Fairy Tale's Strongest Wizard Duel, Part 3. Freed's true motive for entering the tournament was simple, to take down Lucian, the only one standing between Laxus and the crown. Even if he lost, he'd drain Lucian of enough magic power to ease Laxus's path in the next round. Laxus would undoubtedly sneer at such underhanded tactics, but Freed didn't see it as cheating, only strategy. Stepping into the arena, rapier glinting, Freed offered Lucian a measured nod. You're quite strong, he said coolly. Shall we begin? Lucian met his gaze and returned the nod. He flexed his feline-honed paw, ready to strike with a hooking swipe. In truth, he knew very little about Freed's magic. Few did. Like Laxus, the thunder gods kept to themselves. All Lucian had gathered was that Freed excelled in advanced spellcasting and a rare art known as dark script. He remembered those arcane runes at the guild's front gate, Freed's handiwork. They had been so formidable that Lucian and Rebecca had spent days unraveling their enchantments before finally breaking through. And then there was the dark script. Lucian had witnessed Freed carve words like fear and pain into an opponent's flesh with a single flick of his rapier, flooding the victim's mind with dread and agony. Now Lucian braced himself. In moments, he would face that very power head-on. With a sharp cry from the referee, the duel began. Lucian lunged, cat paw arcing toward Freed's side, an opening strike to test his speed. Freed met the attack with a graceful parry, the clash of metal echoing through the arena. So it started, a high-stakes dance of blade and spell that would decide who truly belonged at the summit of Fairy Tale's magical might. Freed dispatched his dark script-tainted opponent with ease. His swordsmanship alone was formidable, but as leader of the Thunder Gods, one who had toppled S-Class wizards time and again, he held even deadlier secrets. Raising his rapier high, he intoned, "Taboo, dark script, darkness." Ebony runes flowed from the blade, searing themselves into his flesh like living ink. In an instant, his flesh shifted. 2 curved horns sprang from his skull, jet-black veins snaked across rippling muscles, and an infernal aura pulsed around him. His strength and magical reserves swelled to terrifying levels. "Dark script, wings," he growled, carving fresh symbols across his shoulder blades. Shadowy wings erupted from his back, their feathers crackling with void energy. With a blur of motion, Freed became a streak of midnight light hurtling straight for Lucian. Lucian's eyes gleamed. He'd studied word magic alongside Rebecca, weaving syllables into fireballs and shields, but he'd never imagined that scripts could be inscribed upon one's own body to supercharge flesh and bone. Watching Freed transform before him, Lucian realized that the arcane tomes in the Grand Library weren't merely spellbooks. They were blueprints, the very foundation of every enchantment ever penned. A slow grin curled Lucian's lips. Today's lesson would be one he'd never forget. After mastering the fundamentals, truly powerful mages customize their magic to suit their own strengths and style. Take Urza Scarlet, for example. She didn't stop at ordinary Drescher-Geement magic. Instead, she refined it into her formidable knight armor magic. No wonder most wizards in this world stick to just one type of spellcraft. Aside from prodigies like Jalal, few have the insight or perseverance to evolve a basic magic into something far more potent. It's over. Fred circled around Lucian, intent on striking him from behind. In the next instant, Lucian's small, palm-sized kitten form swelled with astonishing speed. Blue arcs of electricity crackled along his fur as he ballooned into a towering beast more than 30 meters tall. With one massive, lightning-charged swipe, he caught Fred, impaled halfway by claws that hit as fast as a storm bolt, and sent him hurtling into the arena floor. Fred lay there, unconscious before he even knew what happened. The onlookers from Fairy Tale, who had been biting their nails for Lucian's safety, stared in stunned silence. Even Laxus, fresh from his own fight, watched with wide eyes. He'd suspected Fred might have the upper hand, but he never imagined Lucian would end the match in a single, electrifying strike. Fried's demon transformation had already seen him trounce several S-class wizards. His power was nothing to scoff at. Yet when the dust cleared, the result was unmistakable. Winner, Lucian. Mirajane's clear voice rang out as she swooped down and announced the verdict. In an instant, Lucian reverted to the size of an ordinary cat. Fried's demon form truly was formidable. His gigantification magic, lightning-charged body, and the raw might inherited from the magic dragon even outstripped Master Makarov's pinnacle giant spell. But Fried's sheer strength couldn't compensate for Lucian's lightning-fast reflexes. Before Fried could capitalize on his own speed, Lucian had already slapped him aside. With the fifth round concluded, the final matchups were drawn. Laxus versus Urza, and Lucian versus Lucy. The two victors would battle for the championship. The losers would contend for second and third place. 30 minutes later, the semifinals began. In deference to Master Makarov's strategy, the matches were staggered rather than held simultaneously. First to step into the arena, Lucian versus Lucy. There was no doubt Lucy had lost her first match, yet she refused to admit defeat. With a furious cry, she summoned Aquarius, calling upon the lake just beyond the ring. In an instant, torrents of water cascaded down, nearly flooding the entire island. Even in defeat, her power was plain to see. Now came the second bout, Urza Scarlet versus Laxus Dryar. For Lucian, this was the real draw of the day. Both competitors were S-class wizards who had passed master-level trials and risen to Fairy Tale's very highest ranks. Rumor held that each of them could contend with, or even surpass, the so-called 10th Saint. Before the Tower of Paradise incident, Urza had trailed slightly behind Laxus in raw power, but after conquering the labyrinth and defeating the formidable Kagura, she had proven she possessed not only strength, but an iron will that could match any opponent. As far as who would emerge victorious, Lucian could not even hazard a guess. When the bell rang, Urza wasted no time. With a flourish of her re-equipped magic, she donned her Thunder Emperor armor, its dark plating etched with crackling runes, and drew a crackling thunder cannon in her right hand. Her scarlet hair, neatly braided and bound by a ribbon, whipped around her shoulders as she took up a defensive stance. On the shore, the crowd erupted in cheers. They had come to see lightning clash against lightning, and Urza's formidable presence only stoked their excitement. Across the ring, Laxus Dryar's cloak billowed in anticipation. His eyes glowed faintly with residual lightning magic as he cracked his knuckles, a smug grin playing at his lips. The air between them hummed with electric tension, two of Fairy Tale's greatest champions ready at last to unleash their full power. Lucian leaned forward, waiting for the storm to break. Lucian unleashed his Thunder Dragon Slayer magic with everything he had. The clash between him and Urza was fierce, the air crackling with thunderous energy. In the end, Lucian's mastery of Dragon Slayer power proved superior. He absorbed the bolt from Urza's thunder gun, shattered her Thunder Emperor armor, and struck her down before she even had a chance to change outfits. Victory, however, came at a steep price. Lucian was completely spent, eking out a win by the narrowest of margins. "I never imagined Urza was this strong," he muttered, struggling to catch his breath. In that moment, Lucian realized he had seriously underestimated his guildmates. Urza, who'd always looked down on him, was barely one rank below his own strength. And the power Natsu and Gray had displayed in earlier rounds was far greater than he'd expected. Perhaps his old mentor's warning had been right all along. 30 minutes later, Mirajane floated above the gathered wizards, microphone in hand. Attention, everyone. We're about to begin the final match. This battle will determine not only the strongest wizard in Fairy Tail this year, but also who will become our next guild president. Is it Laxus, wielder of Thunder Dragon Slayer magic, or our future cat president Lucian? Stay tuned. Chapter 287, Elegant Ranged Mage, Update 1. Mirajane's announcement barely left her lips before the entire guild erupted. Lucian, Lucian, Lucian. In their hearts, he was already the next great mage of Fairy Tail. Impressive, considering he'd only been with them for under a year. In response, a fresh chant arose from the other side of the hall. Laxus! 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 Fried, newly awake from his coma, and his comrades Bigsrow and Alba Green threw their voices hoarsely into the fray. But against the thunderous roar for Lucian, their cries sounded strained and desperate. Seeing their eager support veer into embarrassment, the rest of the guilders exchanged sympathetic glances and lowered their volume. Laxus leaned casually against the railing, offering Lucian a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. Looks like everyone's banking on you. He straightened, resolve sharpening his features. Fine. As long as I beat you in the next duel, they'll have to admit who really is Fairy Tail's strongest wizard. This world has always respected the strong, Laxus declared, his voice ringing over the deserted training ground. Lucian met his gaze without flinching. Then prove it. Beat me first. Laxus smirked. With pleasure. He extended a hand skyward. Bring me thunder. In an instant, a bolt of lightning split the clouds and crashed down toward Lucian's head. Lucian's fur bristled beneath his armor. He was part cat, after all. And with a swift flick of his clawed gauntlet, he diverted the lightning bolt harmlessly to his right. Sparks crackled along his arm, but he stayed perfectly balanced. Seizing his moment, Lucian tapped his waist, opening a shimmering portal in his dressing space pouch. He plucked out a single ancient coin and sent it skittering across the ground. Super Railgun! As the lightning he'd steered arced back from his gauntlet, it surged into the coin, propelling it at supersonic speed straight at Laxus. The gold disc spun like a bullet, trailing blue-white energy in its wake. Laxus didn't even flinch. He inhaled deeply, drawing the crackling electricity and the hurtling coin into his chest as if swallowing a sweet memento. The thunder's roar died in an instant, and both fighters faced each other in silence, each waiting for the other's next move. Lucian reached out and plucked the half-worn coin from the table, turning it over in his palm. The first round of trials had confirmed what they suspected. Laxus truly could absorb and devour any lightning attribute energy, just as Natsu's fire magic had once fueled him. At the same time, Laxus had verified Lucian's own affinity for lightning control. Both sides now understood the rules of engagement. That settles it, Lucian said quietly. We can't rely on electrical spells or devices. Anything that generates lightning or plasma will only empower him. He thought through the implications at once. Electromagnetic rifles, plasma cannons, thunder giants, even archaic storm magics, all of it would feed Laxus's strength if he tried to attack directly. Instead, Lucian would have to twist the battlefield to his advantage by manipulating and dispersing Laxus's lightning attacks rather than launching his own raw electricity. Fortunately, Lucian possessed far more than elemental shocks. His wand, one of the finest in any world he'd visited, could channel the deepest reserves of magical power, even outside the realm of lightning. With it, he could weave counterspells, conjure barriers, or unleash versatile enchantments that would keep Laxus off balance. Stripped of his lightning reserves, Laxus might be formidable, but he would no longer be invincible, and that was exactly how Lucian intended to win. Lightning armor! Across the arena, after just one swift exchange, Lucian let go of his long-range lightning bolts. Instead, he withdrew every ounce of magic and electricity into himself, supercharging his body for close-quarters combat. In this world, some mages, like Rabbit Maru of Phantom's Elementals, excel at precise elemental control. Maru's blazing fire magic once caught Atsu off guard. Lightning, however, refuses to be tamed so neatly. Every time Lucian tried to hurl thunderbolts at a masterful opponent, the effort to maintain control bled away his power. So he chose a different path, channel raw magic and crackling lightning through his own muscles, turning himself into a living storm. In a blur, he closed the distance. His unpredictable, short-range surges shattered shields and sent foes reeling. And as a dragon slayer, Lucian's already formidable physique now radiated electric fury, making him all but unstoppable in melee. Laxus stood over the fallen Freed, his chest heaving. He'd mastered the old master's colossal magic, brought Freed to his knees with one thunderous blow, and his close-quarters prowess was nothing to scoff at. Yet he radiated supreme confidence. He was certain he'd be the last man standing on this arena floor. "Thunder Fist!" he roared. In an instant, his body blurred into streaks of lightning as he hurtled toward Lucian. Lucian lifted his wand with calm precision. Obstruction! A halo of blue-green sparks flared around the wand's tip. Laxus, who had already shifted into his elemental state to maximize his speed and power, suddenly faltered. Time itself seemed to resist him. His movements lagged, the crackle of electricity flickered and died, and he was expelled from his elemental form. The obstruction spell was a deceptively simple incantation, but one Lucian had only recently unlocked. At first glance, he'd assumed it merely conjured physical barriers from the ground, hardly the sort of spell a frontline fighter would bother with. Only when he dove deeper into chronomancy did he realize its true nature. Like the freeze spell or the repair spell, obstruction is rooted in time magic. It subtly distorts the target's personal time stream, slowing their perception of everything around them and robbing them of speed. Now, as Laxus struggled to regain his footing, Lucian saw his chance. The arena held its breath. Lucian had just put Dumbledore's lesson into practice. The so-called obstacle spell wasn't limited to freezing something solid. At its highest perfection, Dumbledore claimed, it could even rewind an enemy's movements by a few seconds. The potential was staggering, but Lucian was nowhere near that level yet. For now, all he could manage was a severe slowdown of his opponent's reflexes. Invisible without a trace. As the last syllable left his lips, Laxus's motions slurred as though moving through thick syrup. Seizing the moment, Lucian flicked his wand once more and whispered the disillusionment charm. In an instant, his body blurred and vanished from view. He had deliberately avoided close combat with Laxus. Facing Freed had been almost trivial. Lucian knew he could dispatch her in just a handful of moves without breaking a sweat. Laxus, by contrast, was a different breed of adversary altogether. Charging in recklessly would be nothing short of suicidal. Better, he decided, to embrace the role of a refined, long-range wizard, striking from the shadows and letting his opponents wonder where the next hex would come from. Under Dumbledore's guidance, Lucian's magical aptitude in this world had grown by leaps and bounds. Lightning charms were at the ready if needed, but he'd stocked his repertoire with far more versatile spells. Tonight, he would unveil just how dangerous a concealed, calculating mage could be. Lucian's advantage went beyond mere talent. His magical reserves far exceeded those of any wizard in this world. Unless an opponent was vastly more powerful, he could simply keep them at range, slowly draining their strength with a relentless barrage of long-distance spells. Laxus, by comparison, was clearly outmatched. In this duel, Lucian intended to demonstrate that gap in power so decisively that Laxus wouldn't even get close enough to land a single blow. He actually knows invisibility magic. Laxus's eyes widened as his acceleration abruptly faltered, and Lucian vanished from view. Instinctively, he came to a halt, assumed a defensive posture, and began scouring the battlefield for any trace of his disappearing foe. Chapter 288, The God of Fire Leads the Way, Second Update. Lucian soared directly above Laxus, gathering ember-red energy in his palms. With a fierce cry, he unleashed his spell downward. Thunder explosion, a searing pillar of scarlet light stabbed toward the island below. Laxus barely had time to react. He dove aside as the beam hissed past, and in the same breath, raised his voice in counter-incantation. Thunder pressure raging waves. Instantly, turbulent storm clouds roiled overhead, blotting out the sun. In a deafening cascade, lightning bolts raked the island from every angle. Laxus knew these strikes wouldn't truly harm Lucian. His rival wielded the storm's power as deftly as any lightning god. No, the real purpose was to shatter Lucian's concealment. Under the crackling onslaught, Lucian's illusion flickered and broke. In midair, his phantom cat form shimmered into view, suspended above the battlefield. "Now!" Laxus roared. He thrust off the ground, his body transforming into a streak of pure electricity as he rocketed upward to finish Lucian. But before he could close the distance, the crimson beam he dodged moments ago slammed into the sand beside him, detonating in a violent explosion. The shockwave tore at his form, yanking him off course and sending him hurtling backward through the smoke and debris. Lucian's heart pounded as he wove layers of crackling lightning around himself, the latent power of dragon scales crackling along his skin. Without that protection, the next blow would have left him grievously burned. "Spirit fire," he shouted, flicking his wand. Instantly, a colossal dragon of sapphire flame coalesced in midair, its roar echoing like distant thunder as it dove toward Laxus below. Caught off guard, Laxus barely had time to react before the fiery beast's jaws clamped around him. Yet instead of searing heat, an eerie, bone-chilling cold spread from the wound, as though ice had been forged in fire. Confusion flickered across his face, only to be replaced by grim resolve. As a Dragon Slayer mage, he'd awakened draconic powers of his own, and his defenses would not fail him. "Furious Volt," he bellowed. Brilliant bolts of lightning erupted from his body, shattering the spirit dragon and sending shards of blue flame scattering. Before Lucian could launch another assault, Laxus formed a glowing golden glyph in front of him. Thunder Dragon's Roar. The blast was 10 times more powerful than the last, a deafening crack that tore through the air and disintegrated the remaining embers of Lucian's conjured worm. Laxus staggered back, chest heaving, eyes burning with barely controlled rage. He spat out a snarled promise. "Don't underestimate me." Lucian's dragon form surged deeper, his frame swelling nearly a third larger as crackling energy danced across his scaled skin. He thrust his hands forward and bellowed, "Lightning Bomb!" Instantly, a cluster of dense, pulsing thunderballs coalesced before Laxus and shot toward Lucian like lethal comets. In response, Lucian became pure electricity. Lightning arced wildly over him as he swept his arms in a sweeping arc. The thunderballs shattered at his command, spraying harmless sparks across the arena. Lucian's eyes glittered. "That's all you've got?" As the last fragments of the thunderballs fizzled out, Laxus reemerged, gripping a gleaming Tianhuaji forged entirely of lightning. "Then try this," he growled. With a fierce swing, he launched the electrified glaive. "Thunder Dragon Fang Tianji!" Lucian tilted his head, a spark of genuine curiosity lighting his eyes. He readied himself, but no matter how he twisted or turned, he could not divert the incoming weapon. The Fang Tianhuaji cut through the air like a living bolt, its raw electrical might surging beyond Lucian's control threshold. He realized, with a thrill of challenge, that only by advancing to a level 5 ability user might he bend such overwhelming lightning to his will. Instead, he braced himself for the inevitable clash. Lucian's voice rang out in a single, "Armor Sheikh, Ild." A gleaming, translucent barrier sprang to life before him, arresting the crackling jets of lightning from Fang Tianji. For an instant, the assault seemed broken, but then a deafening roar split the air. Thunder Dragon's Jaw. Lucian's heart skipped a beat. The challenge hadn't come from below him, as he'd first assumed, but from above. The rain of thunder orbs Laxus had unleashed moments ago wasn't intended as a direct strike at all, but as a blinding diversion. As Lucian focused on the exploding spheres of light, Laxus had quietly siphoned half his mana to transform his true body into a thought form, executing Fang Tianji in midair. Meanwhile, his elemental essence, solidified into a second real body, circled overhead, fingers laced together, before hurtling toward Lucian in a crushing downward blow. Lucian wheeled his head just in time to see Laxus's phantom wreathed in lightning and vanishing into mist. Simultaneously, from beneath him, Laxus's genuine form lunged upward with a war cry. "Thunder Dragon Collapse Fist!" "A classic pincer attack," Lucian observed, the corner of his mouth curling in a thin smile. As a psychic, he'd sensed Laxus's split-form trick from the moment the thunder orbs appeared. He could never have been caught unaware by an enemy in the sky, yet he had chosen not to dodge or reinforce his shield prematurely. He intended to meet Laxus head-on, meeting strategy with strategy on his own terms. Lucian steadied himself, ready to turn Laxus's gambit back against him. "First, let's take out your astral form." Lucian's power flared. The ground beneath Laxus's feet shattered as an iron spear burst upward and impaled his astral projection from behind, obliterating it in a flash. From the very start of the duel, Lucian had condensed hundreds of iron spears beneath the ring's boundary, ready to explode up through the earth the moment an opening appeared. Now, with one well-timed strike, he'd severed Laxus's projection and cut his magic reserves in half, on top of the exhaustion from his earlier all-out assault. "I've been outfoxed," Laxus roared, stunned that his astral form had vanished so easily. Refusing to yield, he poured the remainder of his lightning energy into his fists and lunged at Lucian. Even a half-powered projection would be worth the risk if he could land a blow. But he miscalculated again. Just as his fist came crashing down, Lucian flickered out of sight, leaving nothing but a swirl of dust and a gaping void where his body had been. Lucian barely had time to react before Laxus dived in for the attack. Summoning all his strength, he wove his telekinesis around the iron spear concealed beneath his ring while activating his phantom displacement. In an instant, he vanished and reappeared high above his opponent. "Taste Dumbledore's secret magic," he cried, raising his wand. "Vulcan clears the way." With a flick of his wrist, a torrent of searing flame burst from the tip, dyeing the sky over Magnolia City in molten red. Lucian's dragon blood granted him an extraordinary affinity for fire, and the heart of his wand, a strand of Natsu's hair, amplified that power. This incendiary attack exceeded anything Dumbledore himself ever achieved. As the walls of flame condensed into a roaring, spiraling tornado, Lucian hurled it straight at Laxus. The lightning mage didn't even have time to dodge. The firestorm slammed into him from above, sending him crashing into the ground with earth-shattering force. Vulcan's great blade, clear the way. Dragon slayers are famed for their extraordinary magic resistance. Any misstep here could prove fatal. Summoning the searing power of flame, Lucian unleashed the first Vulcan's great blade. Before Laxus could even gather himself, Lucian drove off 4 more blades in rapid succession. Second, third, fourth, and a 5th scorching slash. He finally paused only when he saw Laxus staggering, teetering on the brink of collapse. Lucian's mana pool was virtually limitless. Even though each Vulcan's great blade demanded enormous energy, he could cast a dozen or more with ease. After merely a few seconds' rest to catch his breath, he would be ready to renew the onslaught, relentless until his body refused to endure another strike. Chapter 289, The Secret Only the President Knows, 3rd update. Laxus! Laxus! The Thunder Gods raced forward, alarmed to see their leader sprawled motionless on the ground, his body blackened and burned. Makarov and the other fairy tale mages hurried over as well, their faces etched with worry. Though Makarov had scolded Laxus for his reckless behavior too many times to count, the boy was still his beloved grandson. The other guild members, too, considered him family. No matter how often they sparred or argued in the guild hall, none of them truly wished him harm. "He can't stay like this," one Thunder God muttered. "Get someone to heal him." Before anyone else could move, Lucian dropped from above in a swirl of air. Relief rippled through the crowd at the sight of him. Everyone knew Lucian carried the rare, lost healing magic. Laxus's injuries, though severe, should not prove fatal. "Stand back," Lucian said calmly, kneeling beside the fallen man. He gingerly brushed Laxus's charred hair away from his forehead and extended a slender, furred paw. As he began to weave the healing incantation under his breath, his eyes narrowed in sudden surprise. Something about Laxus's aura, or perhaps a hidden wound, stopped him mid-spell. Lucian's brow creased. He looked up at the anxious faces around him. "There's something else here," he murmured, his words carrying the weight of an ominous discovery. Everyone fell silent, hearts pounding, as the young healer prepared to uncover the secret buried beneath Laxus's shattered defenses. Lucian dropped to one knee beside Laxus and stared at his staff in horror. "Oh no, I think I used too much force. His organs, they might be badly burned." A collective gasp echoed through the guild hall. Makarov's eyes flared red as he lunged forward, pressing Laxus's trembling head to his chest. Tears rolled down the old man's cheeks. "Laxus, stay with me, boy. Grandpa won't let you die. I'll take you to Grandma Pelushika. She'll heal you. I swear it. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have kept the truth about your father from you. I should have told you years ago. I'm so sorry." Around them, Every member of Fairy Tale watched in pained silence, their eyes glistening. Then, without warning, Lucian's staff blazed with brilliant blue light. In an instant, the charred wounds across Laxus's chest and arms began to close, skin knitting back together in a matter of seconds. He barely even winced. Lucian let out a relieved laugh and lowered his staff. Relax, his injuries weren't nearly that bad. Makarov froze, stunned. The other wizards exchanged bewildered glances. Lucian rose and walked around to place a comforting hand on Laxus's shoulder. When I laid my enchanted cat's paw on his forehead earlier, I sensed that Laxus was completely conscious. He didn't lose awareness. He simply wouldn't open his eyes. His lifelong beliefs had just been shattered, and he couldn't bear to face us. He gave Laxus a gentle grin. I faked the severity of his wounds so he could hear your love for him. Sometimes, the only way to remind someone how much they matter is to show them what it feels like to lose it. Makarov's tears fell faster, but this time they were tears of relief. Laxus finally opened his eyes, meeting his grandfather's gaze. And in that moment, surrounded by his family, he knew no power in the world could break the bonds of Fairy Tale. "Grandpa, I was wrong," Lucian shouted, his voice echoing across the clearing. At that moment, Laxus's eyes fluttered open. They were red-rimmed and glistening with tears. "You little brat," he murmured, a proud smile breaking through his exhaustion. Makarov stared at his grandson, while fresh tears rolled down his own cheeks. Above them, Mirajane floated into view, magic microphone in hand. With a beaming grin, she announced, "The champion of this tournament, and the next Guildmaster of Fairy Tale, is Cat Lucian." A roar of joyful, tearful applause erupted from the crowds on the shoreline. The match had been nothing short of spectacular, culminating in Lucian's awe-inspiring fire magic that lit up the sky and laid bare the true power of Fairy Tale wizards. Parents clasped their children close. Young faces gleamed with aspiration, already dreaming of one day mastering magic and earning their place in a legendary guild. Waving his hand, Lucian restored the battered island to its former glory. Stone cliffs mended, scorched earth renewed, and shattered statues whole again. With the champion crowned, all eyes now turned to the stage for the announcement of second and third place. Lucian hadn't expected it, but the tournament rules stipulated that the runner-up slot would pass to Lucy. In the heat of their grueling match, Urza had exhausted all her magic and lay unconscious, gravely injured, so she couldn't continue to contend for second or third place. That opened the door for Lucy to advance straight into the top three. After Lucian's bout with Laxus concluded, both fighters were too spent to face another opponent, and neither wanted to risk battling a teammate. As a result, Lucy claimed the runner-up position without even drawing her wand. In the end, the standings read, champion, Lucian, runner-up, Lucy, third place, Laxus. Back at the Guildhall, Lucy was practically glowing as she pocketed her 200,000 gold prize. Lucian watched her leap around the common room, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Every world needed a protagonist, he mused, and in any story, the hero's luck was always a little extraordinary. He'd once believed the lead might emerge from warriors like Natsu, Grey, Urza, or even Laxus. But now, watching Lucy's triumphant grin, he had to admit, she fit the part perfectly. Makarov climbed down from the balcony, Laxus at his side, and addressed the assembled wizards in the guild hall. The room fell silent. "I have two announcements," Makarov began, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "First, Lucian will undertake the 100-year mission. Upon his return, if he succeeds, he will assume the role of guild master, and I will finally retire." A ripple ran through the hall. "The 100-year mission? The same one Guildarts accepted 3 years ago and still hasn't completed?" One wizard whispered to another. Despite the mission's grim reputation, no one doubted Lucian's ability. In the recent tournament, he had defeated Laxus without breaking a sweat, and he hadn't even unleashed that gigantic spell he'd once used against Freed. If anyone could finish what others could not, it was Lucian. Makarov paused, his shoulders heavy. Second, Laxus intended to use the Shenming Temple to attack the town, and even to turn his powers against his comrades in this very guild. Therefore, by my authority as Guildmaster, I hereby expel him from Fairy Tale. A stunned hush fell over the hall. Laxus lowered his head in resignation, accepting the verdict without protest. Makarov's gavel struck the podium, and the weight of his words settled over everyone present. Tonight, the guild lost a member and set the stage for a new leader to rise. "Please, President, you don't have to do this," several voices protested in unison. "Laxus was only joking with us. Expelling him from the guild is far too harsh." Despite their pleas, Makarov's expression remained solemn. He had already made up his mind. Just then, Lucian stepped forward. "If the President's decision stands, we'll respect it. But mark my words, once the 100-year mission concludes, I'll be Guildmaster, and the first thing I do in that office will be to reinstate Laxus." The tension in the room shifted as everyone absorbed Lucian's promise. Laxus, a mage ranked among the 10 wizard saints, would never quietly accept true expulsion. Lucian offered Makarov a graceful way out, preserving the president's authority while guaranteeing Laxus's return. Makarov's stern gaze softened. He looked at Lucian with a mixture of relief and pride, grateful that his friend had found such an elegant solution. Laxus met Lucian's eyes and in a quiet voice said, "Thank you." Instantly, the serious mood lifted, smiles returned, and laughter rippled through the hall. Makarov cleared his throat, his gentle voice filling the room. "All right, everyone, let's get ready for tonight's magic parade." Makarov waved for Lucian to follow him down into the guild's basement. "As the future master, there are certain secrets only the master should know," he said, his tone grave. Lucian's pulse quickened as they reached a massive rune-etched door sealed with shimmering wards. He'd long suspected what lay beyond, the 3 great fairy magics, the guild's most devastating and closely guarded artifacts. Watching Makarov's hand hover over the seal, Lucian steeled himself. He was about to learn truths that only the guild's leader had ever been permitted to see. Lucian stood before the iron-bound door as Guildmaster Makarov raised his gnarled staff. With a single word, "unseal," a cascade of golden runes flickered to life, untangling the intricate wards that had held the chamber closed for centuries. When the last seal shattered, Makarov's face grew grave. "Inside lies Fairy Tale's most closely guarded secret," he said quietly, "a truth so vital that only the Guildmaster may know it, and it concerns the safety of the entire world. Ivan betrayed us by uncovering part of this secret and plotting with the Dark Guild to seize control of the continent. That is why he was cast out." Lucian's breath caught. He had assumed the hidden vault contained the 3 legendary super magics. Those spells were formidable, but they could not threaten the world itself. This was something far more profound. His curiosity burned hotter than ever. "Show me," he whispered. Makarov nodded and stepped through the threshold. Lucian closed behind. The air inside the chamber shimmered with an otherworldly light, and at its center floated a colossal crystal. Its facets glowed with shifting hues, casting prismatic reflections on the vaulted ceiling. Lucian felt a mixture of awe and trepidation. Whatever power pulsed within that gem, it was clear that the fate of many rested upon understanding, perhaps even controlling it. Lucian stared as Master Makarov gently tapped the surface of the crystal sphere. "This," Makarov said in a low voice, "is Fairy Tale's greatest secret, the fairy heart, also called Lumen, Starlight, or the Myth of Light." Lucian frowned. It wasn't shaped like a heart at all. Instead, a tiny, naked girl lay suspended inside the crystalline globe, her body motionless, no sign to tell if she lived or had long since passed. Curiosity, and a tingle of caution, propelled Lucian to probe the crystal with his magical senses. The moment his aura brushed its surface, his eyes went wide. "Incredible, such power," he breathed. The magical energy contained within the sphere, emanating from the sleeping girl, towered over anything he had ever felt, eclipsing even the strongest mages in Fairy Tale. Makarov's face grew solemn. "She is not a demon or a goblin," he said. "She's Mavis Vermilion, the very first master of Fairy Tale." Lucian's heart thudded. Makarov continued, his voice softening as he recounted the guild's hidden history. "Back when Fairy Tale stood at its zenith, Mavis Vermilion, our founding master, suddenly relinquished her position to her successor and vanished without explanation. It was days before anyone dared speak of her disappearance. Then, one morning, the second master discovered her body lying at the guild's front gate. No wounds, no sign of struggle, just silence." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Lucian tightened his grip on his staff. "Ever since," Makarov concluded, "we have preserved her here, within this crystal, until a day might come when her power could be called upon again. The fairy heart is the living essence of her magic, and the most potent force the world has ever known. Lucian swallowed hard, staring down at the sleeping girl. Whatever mysteries lay sealed inside that crystal, he realized, would change everything he thought he knew about magic, and about fairy tale itself. Lucian listened intently as Makarov spoke, his tone grave and measured. "It's wrong to call him a corpse," the guildmaster began. "Although his heartbeat has long since ceased, the immense magic power trapped within him still flows unchecked. He is, in effect, a living dead. 30 years ago, the second-generation guildmaster sealed the first president in this magic crystal and devoted himself to researching a way to restore life. Spell after spell, experiment after experiment, all ended in failure. But in the course of those countless arcane trials, strange magics fused together and transformed the old master's body into an infinite well of power. Think of it like the Magic Council's long-range spirit cannon, only instead of charging a single shot, his remains can produce limitless energy on demand. In the wrong hands, that power could obliterate entire nations, or even the world itself. That is why Fairy Tale bears the solemn duty of guarding his body, preserving not only his legacy, but the safety of every living soul." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Lucian's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the implications. "So there are people here, good and evil, and there are forces beyond even this world," Lucian said quietly. Makarov nodded. "Precisely, and now you know why we must protect him at all costs." Lucian possessed boundless magical energy, yet even he couldn't match the first president's prowess. Restoring the magical elf's magic reserves would take Lucian years of sleepless toil, whereas the first president could reignite them in the blink of an eye. From that revelation, Lucian not only learned the origin of the Goblin King's heart, but also grasped just how formidable the world's magicians truly were. The first president might have looked young, but he had invented 3 legendary arcane arts, an achievement that alone was staggering, and if someone strong enough could incapacitate him so completely, then there were surely even more powerful sorcerers hiding in the shadows. Lucian's triumphant pride after defeating Laxus evaporated instantly. "Now that you understand this secret, follow me." Makarov led Lucian into a hidden chamber. He opened a concealed cabinet and withdrew 3 ancient spellbooks, placing them carefully into Lucian's hands. Makarov set 3 hefty grimoires before him. "These are Fairy Tale's ultimate spells, Fairy Law, Fairy Glory, and Fairy Ball. I've only mastered Fairy Law myself, so I'll walk you through its essentials before you depart. The other 2 are yours to study at your own pace." Lucian felt his pulse quicken as he looked over the thick volumes. He bowed respectfully. Of course he would study them. No price was too high for such power. If it weren't for his animagus transformation deadline in the Harry Potter world, just 2 months away, he might never have paused his northern expedition to tackle fairy magic first. But now, with these legendary grimoires in hand, and Master Makarov's instructions on opening and sealing the guild's secret vault fresh in his mind, Lucian didn't leave the library. He settled at a long oak table and set about committing every incantation, diagram, and annotation to memory. He knew he couldn't carry the 3 super spell books on his upcoming centuries-old mission. Their pages would have to live in his mind alone. That presented no problem. Lucian slipped on Feng Yong's memory glasses, a device he'd acquired for just this purpose, and summoned the collective intellect of his magically generated clones. Together, they delved into the mysteries of Fairy Law, Fairy Glory, and Fairy Ball, imprinting arcane symbols and rulings onto every corner of his consciousness. By the time he rose to leave, the knowledge and the power it held was already his. In under an hour, Lucian had absorbed every word from the 3 ancient spellbooks. He closed the final tome and let out a low whistle. So these truly are the legendary 3 great super magics. The first, Fairy Law, was by far the simplest of the trio. It only required a solid foundation in light magic. Its power was extraordinary, capable of wiping out even the toughest foes in an instant. But it carried a crippling drawback. Each cast leached away a portion of the user's life force and even shortened their lifespan. Most mages would balk at such a price. Lucian merely shrugged. Immortality had long been his byproduct. he had an eternity yet to live. As for the immediate drain on vitality, his body was anything but ordinary. Physical enhancements and the fusion of dragon crystals from two different worlds meant his reserves could regenerate unless utterly shattered. True, integrating the native dragon crystals here would demand even more energy, but on the scale of magic, the extra toll was almost negligible. Against opponents of comparable strength, the hit to his stamina would be minimal. Knowing all this, Fairy Law's only drawback was little more than a footnote. The other two super magics, however, were an entirely different matter. Their requirements and their mastery were staggeringly complex. But complexity, for Lucian, was an invitation. He felt a spark of excitement light up his eyes. If these spells were as formidable as legends claimed, mastering them would place him beyond nearly any adversary in existence. And he thrived on challenges. Fairy Light is every bit as formidable as the Fairy Law itself. It gathers the brilliance of the sun, moon, and stars, condenses it into a single, merciless beam, and unleashes it from the sky to obliterate any foe. Unlike many high-tier spells, it doesn't drain the caster's lifespan or vitality, but mastering it is exceptionally difficult. First, you need an extraordinary command of light magic. Even Makarov, one of the realm's finest mages, tried and failed to learn it, so you can imagine how demanding it must be. If Lucian wants to wield this power, his light magic proficiency must surpass Makarov's. Second, his magical reserves must be vast, at least at the holy 10th tier, which he has now attained. Finally, flawless magical control is essential. Without it, Fairy Light is like giving a child a loaded gun. The destructive potential is there, but without precision, you'll never land a decisive strike. Chapter 291, The Terrifying Black Dragon, Second Update. Lucian studied the third super fairy orb with wide eyes. This was the one he had least expected, a time magic. By freezing the flow of time around its caster, it created an almost perfect defensive barrier. No wonder Master Makarov had been unable to learn it. Time magic ranked among the most difficult of all spells, and in this world was considered lost. There were no surviving tomes, no teachers, no references, nothing to guide even the most talented mage. Yet Lucian refused to believe the path was closed forever. During his travels in the Harry Potter realm, he had researched chronomancy, experimenting with time-turner charms and ancient temporal runes. That gave him a foothold, enough perhaps to rediscover lost techniques, and if further worlds revealed new lore, he might one day unlock the full power of this forbidden art. Lucian, the magic parade is about to start. Mirajane's voice rang out from the stairwell. At 10 o'clock that evening, he left the silent, lamp-lit shelves of the underground library and climbed the steps to the guild courtyard. Lanterns floated overhead, and every member of Fairy Tale stood ready, their faces alight with excitement. Tonight's spectacle promised wonders beyond imagining, and Lucian intended to be at the very center of them. Makarov, clad in an absurdly oversized clown costume, beamed down at Lucian. As the new guildmaster, he announced with a twinkle in his eye, "You'll lead the parade today. I, your old president, will bring up the rear. Together, we'll march all the way around Magnolia City, and that'll be that." Lucian nodded, lightning crackling across his gloves. "Understood." He thrust his hands skyward. Thunder Giant! The earth trembled as a colossal, 200-meter-tall golem of thunder and stone rose from the pavement. Lightning arced along its hulking limbs, illuminating the city in stark white flashes. In a heartbeat, Lucian himself expanded to match its scale, his form growing until he stood poised atop the giant's head, waving his feline-clawed glove. "The Fairy Tale Magic Parade begins now," he cried. "Let's go!" A roar of cheers erupted from the assembled wizards and performers. They fell in line behind the Thunder Giant, their hearts pounding with excitement as they followed Lucian down Magnolia's broad central avenue. Along the sidewalks, residents and tourists, long accustomed to Fairy Tale's endless surprises, gaped in astonishment at the towering figure and its dynamic leader. Cries of joy and awe rippled through the crowd. Above them, fireworks detonated in brilliant bursts of crimson, gold, and sapphire. Each mage added their own flair. Kana's glittering tarot cards spun and sparkled in an intricate aerial dance. Macau unleashed curling purple flames that formed swirling runes against the night sky. Wakaba coaxed gentle smoke rings into the air, each suspended in the shape of a heart. Together, their magic painted the city in living color, heralding a new chapter under Guildmaster Lucian's command. Livy, Lucy, and Alba Green danced with laughter on the motorcade's elevated platform, their colorful ribbons fluttering in the morning breeze. Above them, Urza appeared in a dazzling set of armor, her summoned swords and lances orbiting her like constellations as she soared through the sky. On the ground, Gray sculpted a gleaming ice castle, its turrets carved with intricate runes. Juvia let a cascade of water swirl behind the fortress, tracing the fairy tale emblem against the clouds, while Natsu sent plumes of fire racing upward, exploding into crackling fireworks that rained embers over the cheering townsfolk. Magic of every hue painted the streets in a dreamlike glow. 2 days later, Lucian stood at the guild's doorway, his travel pack strapped firmly across his back. Guildmaster Makarov watched him with solemn pride. He'd never fully understood the details of the so-called 100-year mission, only that it had been commissioned by the Dragon of the Magic Array, the oldest mage guild on the northern continent, and that involved dragons. Makarov cleared his throat. "Take care, Lucian. We'll be waiting for your return." Lucian returned the smile. "I won't disappoint you." He spread his newly mastered mana wings, their feathery edges shimmering like moonlight, and leapt into the air. Below him, the port buzzed with ships bound for every corner of the world. By sea, the journey to the northern continent could take over a month. Lucian glanced at the horizon, where dawn's light met the distant swell of ocean. He didn't have the luxury of time. Drawing in a steady breath, he angled his wings northward and shot straight up, his figure shrinking against the rising sun. Ahead lay uncharted waters, soaring cliffs, and, if the rumors were true, ancient dragons that had not been seen in 100 years. Lucian's heart thudded with equal parts excitement and resolve. "Full speed," he whispered to the wind, and with that single command, he vanished into the vast sky, determined to complete the century-old mission that awaited him on the northern continent. Lucian pressed his back against the cool sand and let out a slow breath. 2 months remained to find a fragment of dragon crystal and fuse within himself the strengths of the 3 great world dragons, an essential step if his animagus transformation was ever to settle on an ideal dragon form. He'd crossed the open sea without rest for 3 straight days. At last, the shoreline of the North Continent lay before him, bathed in dawn's pale light. He stood and stretched, eyes widening at the unfamiliar creatures that drifted past him. Winged fish flickered over the shallow waves, while on land, mottled ferns and curling vines brushed the dunes. Lucian scooped handfuls of fresh water from a tide pool and drank deeply, then tore into the simple rations tucked in his pack. Even amid the wild beauty, a single thought steered his focus. Guildarts. Rather than head straight for the Dragon Array and formally accept the 100 Years mission, Lucian drew his wand and murmured the tracking charm he had once cast in the guild itself, a subtle enchantment keyed to Guildarts' unique aura. He recalled how the spell had faltered if its quarry died, or if some powerful seal or ward blocked its signal. No flicker of confirmation meant only 3 possibilities. Guildarts was dead, magically sealed, or his enemies had discovered and countered Lucian's tracking magic. Heart-pounding, Lucian waited. The sea breeze teased at his hair as he strained to catch even the faintest tug on the spell. If Guildarts were truly gone, his only hope to complete the Dragon Crystal quest and survive his animagus trial would crumble here on this wild shore. But Lucian steeled himself. He had crossed oceans to reach this point. He would not turn back now. Because only a living target could register on this display, Lucian knew with absolute certainty that whoever he was tracking was still alive. That was precisely why he'd agreed to a century-long mission to uncover the dragon's trail. If even Guildarts, the only mage stronger than Makarov, had vanished on this quest, who was he to rush headlong to the northern continent? And why not push straight on to the Dragon Array, the oldest wizarding guild, instead of finding Guildarts first? Caution above all. 3 years of silence from Guildarts spoke volumes about the dangers ahead, and the Dragon Array's tomb-like archives offered no easy answers. Better, Lucian decided, to locate Guildarts, learn what he could of the situation, and then proceed. With his speed, a single tracking spell would yield results within a day. Drawing a steady breath, he murmured the incantation, Directio apparare Gildarts clavi. In an instant, a slender golden arrow materialized in midair, its tip gleaming with arcane light. Lucian flexed his wings, felt the familiar tingle of power at his back, and launched himself skyward, ready to follow the arrow to whatever awaited. Lucian rode the golden arrow high above the northern continent, gazing down at the towns and villages scattered across the land. The level of magical technology here rivaled that of the eastern continent, yet their rail network was far less developed. Only a handful of tracks snaked between settlements, nowhere near the comprehensive lines he'd seen back home. 5 hours into his flight, the arrow's engine sputtered, and Lucian hauled the emergency brake. The craft jerked to a halt above a barren mountain range. His eyes snapped forward and froze. "It can't be a dragon?" Hovering before him was a titanic black dragon, its midnight scales glinting like spilled ink. A wave of primal power radiated off the beast, shaking Lucian's limbs with every beat of its massive wings. His heart thundered in his chest. Confronting such a creature would be suicide. He dared not draw his sword. Legend said dragons had vanished long ago, relegated to children's tales. Even so, he'd heard that Natsu and Gajeel once trained under real dragons, mastering dragon-slaying magics. Lucian had half-hoped to find proof of these ancient giants on the northern continent, but never imagined they still roamed, still breathing fire, and still as overwhelmingly powerful as myth claimed. Lucian's power was undeniably at saint class level, the pinnacle of the 10 wizard saints. Makarov himself had judged that Lucian's strength rivaled that of the 4 heavenly kings of the eastern continent. And yet, standing before this dragon, Lucian felt completely outmatched. Not even the magical drakes of Middle-earth, nor the presence of Sauron, had ever stirred such dread in him. Slaying a dragon and refining its crystal, it was far more difficult than he'd ever imagined. He drew in a steady breath, tamping down every flicker of magic, and cast disillusionment to cloak himself from the dragon's keen senses. At the same time, he braced his wand, prepared to apparate away at the first sign of real danger. Destroy evil and uphold justice, one day, he vowed. A deafening roar split the night air. Lucian's head snapped up. On a nearby ridge stood a broad-shouldered man with fiery orange hair. With a mighty shout, the stranger vaulted skyward and unleashed a devastating punch on the black dragon's snout. The force of the blow rippled like thunder. Such overwhelming magic. Could it really be? Gildarts? Chapter 292, 5 Divine Dragons, 3rd update. Lucian's pulse quickened as he recalled Makarov's description. Gildarts, Clive wielded an almost unfathomable form of magic known as crush. With a mere thought, it shattered the atomic bonds of any substance it touched, reducing steel beams to powder, or at the caster's whim, scattering the fragments into thousands of miniature copies. Unmatched in raw destructive power, Crush had earned its reputation. So did its careless wielder. Every time Gildarts returned to Magnolia, errant shockwaves would level nearby buildings, and the town would seal off affected districts under Gildarts mode to prevent further collateral damage. Climbing the gentle rise of the hill, Lucian finally spotted the battle ahead. A massive black dragon loomed against the sky, its scales shimmering like oil slicks. Opposite it stood a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, silver hair whipping in the wind, exactly as Makarov had described. A tracking spell's glowing arrow hovered over him, confirming Lucian's hunch. This had to be Gildarts. For a moment, Lucian dared to smirk. He was the one who had stunned the crowd at the fairy tale tournament, after all. But then the dragon let loose a deafening roar that split the air, and something in Lucian's chest tightened. The beast's wings beat up a vortex of dark energy, and the very ground beneath Lucian's feet trembled. He stared, wide-eyed. The roles had reversed. Lucian, the prodigy who once left others speechless, now found himself utterly unprepared for the sight before him. And as the next wave of draconic power unfurled across the battlefield, he realized that whatever happened next, neither he nor anyone else would take this fight for granted. Lucian dug in his heels as he hurled every ounce of strength into a single crushing blow. The moment his fist connected with the black dragon's scaled hide, he braced himself for impact, only to feel nothing. His knuckles skidded off the beast's flank as though they'd struck solid stone. A thunderous roar shook the clearing. With a single terrifying swipe, The dragon's forelegs struck Lucian's left arm and snapped it like a brittle branch. His knee buckled under a second strike. His leg gave way. He hit the earth hard, pain exploding through him. The dragon loomed over him, head low, eyes gleaming. "Human," it rumbled, each word echoing like distant thunder. "You have some strength, and you've entertained me. I won't kill you today." Lucian tried to drag himself back to his feet, but the dragon's massive claws dug into the ground as it shook its head, amused. Without another glance, it spread its ebony wings and took to the sky. Lucian gasped for breath, blood pooling beneath him. He watched the dragon's silhouette vanish into clouds, confusion and awe battling in his mind. The creature had come in search of dragons that had gone into hiding, but those dragons were cunning, and none had been found. Then, in a turn of fortune, or misfortune, the black dragon had encountered Lucian, a human warrior strong enough to engage in combat. It had toyed with him, broken him, and then simply walked, or rather, flown away. Somewhere far off, the dragon would return to its underwater lair, slipping beneath dark seas to rest. When it woke, it would resume its hunt for the scattered dragonkind. In its heart burned a single, unwavering mission, to slay every dragon in the world. Lucian lay sprawled in the grass, staring up at empty sky. He whispered through grit teeth, "If even one dragon this powerful can be felled and reduced to nothing more than a crystal, how were the rest of them ever defeated?" He didn't yet know the answer, but as pain seared through him, he vowed to discover it. And next time the dragon found him, Lucian would be ready. There must be something I don't know. As the black dragon vanished into the sky, Lucian sprinted to Gildart's side. He scooped up the severed arm and thigh, aligned them carefully, and wove a healing spell. There should be good as new. In this world, healing magic remains extraordinarily powerful. It can't truly regenerate a lost limb, but it can reattach and seal wounds so perfectly that recovery is almost instantaneous, provided the severed parts haven't been corrupted by dark energy. In rare cases, advanced alchemical potions can even trigger full regeneration. Gildarts flexed his reformed arm and leg, testing each joint. Then he turned, eyes wide, staring at the fairy tale guild mark on Lucian's back. "Healing magic like that? Lucian, when did you learn this lost art? And aren't your fur and eyes supposed to be blue?" Lucian slipped his wand away with a small smile. "My name's Lucian, not Harpy, and I only joined Fairy Tale a year ago. As for my fur, don't worry, it's still the same shade of blue. But more importantly, how do you feel?" Gildart stretched his restored limbs once more, then laughed in relief. "Perfect. Feels like I was never hurt." "Thank you, Lucian." Gilda studied him intently. Lucian and Hobby bore an uncanny resemblance, as if they were twins, but subtle differences in Lucian's eyes and posture set him apart. "Tell me," Gildas continued, "what brings you to the northern continent? Has something gone wrong with the guild? Did the president send you to meet me?" Lucian shook his head. "No. I came here for the same reason you did, to undertake that century-old mission." Gildas's eyes widened. "You mean the black dragon over there is your objective, and you have the president's blessing for this?" Lucian nodded once, crisply. For a moment, Gildas was at a loss for words. Everything he'd heard about Hobby suggested they were equal in power, apart from Hobby's mastery of the lost healing magic, and that no one above S rank would dare attempt such a dangerous task. How, then, had Lucian secured approval? A flicker of suspicion crossed Gildas's mind. Had Lucian arrived here alone, claiming the mission, without the guildmaster's knowledge? "Don't worry, the president has already signed off. And don't underestimate me. I'm more than capable." Lucian pulled a coin from his pocket, flipped it between his fingers, then swept his arm forward. A blinding beam lanced from his railgun, tearing a massive crater in the hillside beside them. Only then did Gildas finally believe that Lucian truly carried the president's authorization to claim this century-old mission. Embarrassed, Gildas scratched the back of his neck. "All right, the centennial mission does center on dragons," he admitted. "But that black dragon we just fought isn't my real quarry. I stumbled across it by accident today. My actual targets are the other 5, known as the Divine Dragons. They came to the northern continent centuries ago and have been terrorizing it ever since. Our orders at the Centenary Task Force are to find them and either seal or slay them for good. I've been combing this land for 3 years, and still haven't sniffed out a single one. If those 5 dragons prove anywhere near as powerful as this black one, to be honest, maybe we should cut our losses and return to the guild. Since Arafcelia, leader of the demonic array dragon guild, unveiled the centenary mission, he's only stated its goals, never the whereabouts of the 5 divine dragons. For the last 3 years, I've scoured every major city across the northern continent for a single lead, only to draw a blank. Admittedly, I don't have the best sense of direction. Too often I chase dead ends, winding up hopelessly lost amid tangled forests and jagged peaks. This morning was no exception. I found myself stranded in a remote mountain pass when a gleaming black dragon dropped from the sky. Its mocking hiss turned to a savage onslaught. Each strike left me gasping for breath. If Lucian hadn't arrived when he did, I'd be looking at permanent injuries, my lower body shattered beyond repair, reliant on magical prosthetics just to stand. I owe him everything. Dragons vary wildly in power, and that sable worm was no ordinary beast, very likely the strongest of the 5. In its fierce eyes, I was reminded of Lord Serena of the Eastern Continent. One that he revered 4 kings, whose body once harbored 8 dragon crystals. Lucian frowned as he replayed today's battle in his mind. If every dragon in this world were as powerful as the black dragon he'd just faced, there was no way God Serena could have slain 8 of them single-handedly. Then there were Laxus's dragon crystal and the one Ivan had purchased from the northern continent. Proof that mages over there could kill dragons, too. Clearly, these creatures were formidable, though, like human spellcasters, they probably varied in strength. I'm going to the demonic dragon array to speak with the guild leader and gather more information about these dragons, Lucian announced. Once I have the facts, I'll decide whether to accept the mission. If I opt out, you can return to the guild first. Lucian had absorbed every detail about the centennial mission from Gildas, and he had no intention of backing down. The stronger these dragons proved to be, the greater the potential of their crystals once fused, and that prospect, he decided, might not be so bad after all. Chapter 293, Farron Arafcelia, Update 1. Then I'll go with you. Gildarts hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowed. Ever since he'd witnessed the Black Dragon's terrible power, all confidence in the age-old quest to seal the 5 divine dragons had slipped away. He'd been on the verge of abandoning the mission entirely and returning to the guild. Yet when Lucian insisted on pressing forward, Gildarts found himself unable to refuse. They were comrades in magic, and Lucian had just saved his life. All right, Gildarts said at last, but if it proves too dangerous, we'll turn back together and head home. Lucian nodded, relief washing over him. True, the Black Dragon had felled Gildarts with a single blow, but that hardly meant the man was weak. On the contrary, Lucian had never met anyone as powerful. No one, not even Laxus, came close to Gildarts' raw strength. With an ally like him at his side, Lucian dared to hope they might at least overcome a lesser divine dragon. First, though, they would need to learn everything they could about each of the 5 divine dragons, strengths, weaknesses, and the exact nature of their legendary powers before attempting anything so monumental. Lucian's true ambition wasn't to carry out the century-old mission of sealing the 5 divine dragons. It was to become a dragon slayer mage. After all, if you're not set on fighting dragons yourself, you can always buy a dragon crystal, like Ivan did. Lucian had no interest in unnecessary risks, and if he ever decided to face a dragon in combat, he'd wait until he was strong enough to be absolutely certain of victory. Above all, the sheer power of the Black Dragon had left him spellbound. After a brief rest for himself and his cat companion, Lucian set out for the Dragon Magic Guild of the Arcane Array. Thanks to his ability to fly, they reached their destination well before dusk. There it is, the Dragon of the Arcane Array, Gildas called, pointing to the fortress below. The castle looked easily 100 years old, its stone walls veined with cracks and draped in moss. Above the main entrance loomed a massive carved dragon, its wings unfurled in eternal flight. This was the first mage guild in the world, Gildas explained, but its ranks have long since vanished. Only one sorceress remains, the aged Arafcelia, who issued our century-old quest. With that, Gildas pushed open the great wooden doors. Lucian stepped into the castle's cool, shadowed halls. ready to face whatever trials awaited inside. When Gildarts and Lucian stepped into the great hall of the Dragon Guild of the Magic Array, an elderly wizard in flowing robes embossed with draconic runes appeared before them. He held a staff carved into the shape of a snarling dragon's head, and his eyes gleamed with recognition. "Welcome, brave number 99, the old man greeted Lucian briskly. "I'm the president of this guild. Weren't you brave number 98 3 years ago? After all this time without any word, I'd assumed you dead." Lucian stiffened under the wizard's appraisal. The president's gaze then flicked to Gildarts, and with a murmured incantation, space magic, the old man vanished in a swirl of light, only to reappear moments later on the far side of the hall. Lucian arched an eyebrow in surprise. Space magic was notoriously difficult to master in this realm, its teleportation spells limited to short hops and riddled with unpredictable side effects. It bore little resemblance to the smooth, far-reaching apparition he'd studied back home. He remembered tales of Joseph, the ghost guildmaster, who had once experimented with teleportation. Joseph had dreamed of fusing its principles with phantom transformation to eliminate apparition's telltale crack that warned enemies of a wizard's arrival. Lucian found himself wondering how many lives could be saved if that flaw were overcome. A chill ran down his spine. If I hadn't been lucky, I would have died out there. Gildarts exhaled sharply, his thoughts drifting back to the black dragon they had just slain. The horror of that battle still throbbed in his chest. Arafcelia's eyes suddenly brightened. "So you found a clue about the 5 divine dragons?" She leaned forward. "Ever since that century-old expedition, when every magician sent against the dragons was slaughtered, no one had returned with so much as a rumor. Successive teams had been forced to start from zero. If Lucian had somehow survived an encounter, perhaps he'd uncovered something no one else had. Even if it led to a dead end, every scrap of information could one day help another mage seal those terrible beasts." Lucian shook his head. "No, I didn't come face to face with the 5 divine dragons. What I found was a black dragon, and it was more powerful than I could have imagined. I was on the brink of defeat. If it hadn't chosen to spare me, well, I wouldn't be here now. You've told me that the 5 divine dragons are the most fearsome creatures in the northern continent, the ultimate scourge. Does that mean they're even stronger than a black dragon?" At his words, Arafcelia froze. Astonishment and something deeper, more primal, flickered across her face. Gildas stared at Arafcelia in amazement. "You actually met him, and you lived through it? I never expected you to come out unscathed. You're incredibly lucky." Lucian, perched on Gildas's shoulders, craned his neck. Do you really know that black dragon?" Arafcelia's pale eyes flickered with a distant sorrow as she nodded. "I know him well. His name is Acnologia, but he wasn't always a dragon. Over 400 years ago, he was a human mage, a brilliant one at that. When a worm laid waste to his home and family, he swore vengeance. He poured every ounce of his power into studying draconic arcana until he mastered dragon-slaying magic." She paused, and Gildas and Lucian leaned forward, hanging on every word. Arafcelia continued, her voice low. "Acnologia hunted the dragons across the eastern continent without mercy. One by one, he felled even the greatest of them. In time, the magic he wielded and the rage that fueled it transformed him into a dragon himself, a black behemoth of unparalleled power. Both humans and surviving dragons dubbed him the King of Dragons, the Black Feather of the End, the origin of evil." Lucian swallowed hard. "All the dragons. He killed them all?" "Almost." Arafcelia's gaze drifted northward, as though she could still see the devastation. 5 divine dragons and a handful of lesser worms escaped his wrath. They fled from the eastern continent to the frozen reaches of the north, hoping to hide from Acnologia's relentless hunt. Gildas shook his head in disbelief, eyes wide. Lucian felt his pulse quicken. They had grown up hearing legends of dragon slayers, but he'd never imagined one could be so terrifyingly strong. "He slaughtered nearly every dragon in the world," Lucian whispered. "Acnologia? That's what I'm up against?" As the wind moaned through the ruined battlements around them, the 2 young men exchanged a glance. In that instant, they understood the true meaning of dread and the impossible odds they now faced. Lucian's eyes narrowed. "You said he was once human and only became a dragon because he practiced this so-called dragon-slaying magic?" Elefcelia stumbled back, startled by the sudden question. Who are you? She'd assumed the small cat before her was nothing more than Gildart's pet. Lucian's fur rippled with a surge of power, and in an instant his form shifted. Standing tall, he wore the aura of a 10th-tier saint. I am the 99th hero, he announced quietly. Her breath caught. A cat with saint-level magic? Lucian's gaze was steady. I'm more than I appear. Recovering her composure, Elefcelia inclined her head and began again. The term dragon-slaying magic is a misnomer. In truth, it's an advanced auxiliary spell devised by Irene Belsarian. By channeling draconic essence into a human, it grants them a fraction of a dragon's power. At first, it merely enhances strength, resilience, and magical aptitude. But if one pushes the spell to its absolute limit, the caster's body, and mind undergo a total transformation into a dragon. She paused, watching Lucian's reaction. Yet that ultimate metamorphosis is a curse as much as a gift. Anyone who fully becomes a dragon loses all remnants of their humanity, their emotions, memories, even the simple joy of sleep. They exist only as beasts of legend, detached from the world they once knew. Lucian absorbed her words in silence, the soft glow of his saint magic barely flickering at his wrists. Somewhere between hero and dragon, his own fate was waiting to be decided. Even when they use magic to take on human form, it's only skin deep. At heart, they remain dragons. Elefcelia's lips twisted with bitter irony. Just like me. In an instant, his body swelled. Scales rippled across sinewy muscles, wings unfolded with a thunderous beat, and he towered above them as a magnificent dragon, emerald gem glinting at the center of his forehead. I set out to seal the 5 great dragons, he rumbled, voice now echoing from deep within that colossal frame. To do it, I studied Irene Belsarian's ancient grimoire alone and earned the title of Dragon Slayer. In the end, though, I became a dragon myself. That's why I'm the last one left in the guild. My companions all passed away of old age. Gildarts and Lucian froze in awe as Elefcelia's form surged upward, her body rippling until she stood as a titanic dragon. Lucian's pulse thundered in his ears, but then a flash of excitement lit his eyes. In her trembling words, he had discerned the truth. Elefcelia had not gained dragon-slaying magic by bargaining with some ancient worm, nor by embedding her spells in dragon crystals. She had taught herself, page by painstaking page, from the same grimoire Irene Belsarian once left behind. If that was the case, then he, Lucian, could do exactly the same. No slaughter of the 5 divine dragons, no perilous quest for crystal shards. All he needed was time, diligence, and that long-forgotten book of arcana. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He took a steadying breath and stepped forward. President Elefcelia, your sacrifice to shield the northern continent and its people is beyond measure. He began, voice firm despite the awe he felt. If you would allow me access to the Belsarian grimoire, if you would teach me what you've learned, I vow to do whatever it takes to honor your legacy and defend this land in your name. Lucian's eyes shone with admiration. Your resolve is inspiring, Elefcelia. I'll stand by you as you seal the 5 divine dragons. At his words, Elefcelia shifted back into her human form, a bright smile lighting her features. She laughed softly. I'm hardly as noble as you make me out to be. I simply can't bear to watch humankind suffer at the claws of titanic dragons. And truth be told, being a dragon isn't without its perks. I still feel as vigorous as ever. Lucian's brow furrowed. It's unfortunate. Even if the 5 divine dragons aren't quite on the same level as the black dragon, they're still far stronger than ordinary worms. With our current abilities, and lacking any solid leads, even finding them would be impossible, let alone defeating them. He exhaled in frustration. Gildas, standing nearby, offered a sympathetic nod. You're right, he agreed. None of us are nearly powerful enough to take on such foes, second only to the black dragon itself. Elefcelia's expression grew thoughtful. Then we'll grow stronger, she said firmly. This mission, locking away the divine dragons, spans a century. There's no rush. We'll train, gather knowledge, and only when we have truly leveled the playing field will we confront them. Lucian met her gaze, determination flickering in his eyes. Very well. We'll make every day count. Together, the 3 set their minds to the long road of training and discovery that lay ahead, confident that in time they would be ready to seal even the mightiest of dragons. Arafcelia paused, considering her next words carefully. In the meantime, I'll gather every shred of information we can find on the 5 divine dragons. She glanced at the lone cat at Lucian's side and then back to her companions. The two of you make a formidable team, but against the 5 divine dragons, we'd be courting death, just like the mages who came before us. You must remember, even at his peak, our predecessor could only hold his own against the Earth Divine Dragon, one of the original 6. Though the earth was eventually sealed, so too was his heart, imprisoned by the labyrinth the dragon created, and his power was gravely diminished. Arafcelia's gaze hardened. We cannot afford to let brave mages perish one by one. Instead, we'll do this differently. We'll help each mage grow in strength, hunt down every clue, and only then unite to confront the 5 divine dragons, one at a time. Gildas nodded in agreement. That plan makes perfect sense. Lucian allowed himself a small, relieved smile. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Gildas's shoulder. Gildas, you should return to the guild first, gather reinforcements, and relay Arafcelia's strategy. We'll be in touch as soon as we have fresh leads. With a respectful bow, Gildas turned and hurried off. Lucian watched him go, then faced Arafcelia. Let's get to work, he said quietly. Arafcelia returned his nod, determination gleamy, nung in her eyes. Together, they began mapping out their next move, one step closer to unraveling the mystery of the 5 divine dragons. I want to stay here and learn dragon slaughter magic from you, Arafcelia. Lucian turned to face her. You told me that Acnologia used dragon slaughter magic to slaughter countless dragons before he became the Black Dragon. That proves this magic can restrain dragons. Someday, I intend to seal the 5 divine dragons, and to do that, I need this power. Arafcelia regarded him coolly. Mortal spells weaken against dragonhide, but dragon slaughter magic, being of dragon origin, cuts through it without mercy. It's far more effective. However, you must understand the cost. The moment you begin to use draconic power, it will erode your humanity. Your senses will dull, taste will fade, sleep will vanish. You'll endure agonizing transformation until you become a dragon yourself. Lucian held her gaze. I know the risks, and I accept them. A flicker of hesitation crossed Arafcelia's features. She exhaled slowly, then nodded. Very well, but don't expect any further warnings. Study carefully, or the magic will devour you. Relief and determination lit Lucian's eyes. He bowed respectfully. Thank you, Lady Arafcelia. I must admit, I also have my own reasons driving this request. Lucian watched the distant sky, where dark clouds swirled like a living thing. If the 5 divine dragons and the black dragons aren't stopped, they'll raise the northern continent in time, he said, voice low. And once they've broken that land, they could sweep back across the sea and threaten the eastern continent, where all my friends are. To protect them, I need dragon-slaying magic. His mentor met his gaze calmly. Wanting dragon-slaying magic to defend those you love isn't selfish. I was driven by the same desire when I was young. Since you've made your choice, I will teach you. But you must understand, dragon-slaying magic is the most difficult art even for a trained mage. None of my fellow wizards ever mastered it, and they all passed away of old age before they could. Dragon-slaying magic is recorded only in a handful of ancient grimoires, each filled with arcane symbols and layered incantations. Even gifted spellcasters struggle to decipher its logic. When Lucian's mentor founded the Dragon of the Magic Array, he opened his vault of texts to guild members, hoping to train an army of dragon slayers who could one day surround the 5 divine dragons and seal them away, one by one. Yet despite years of study and countless trials, not a single mage succeeded in mastering the technique. Now, as Lucian stood on the threshold of that same daunting challenge, he knew the path before him was as perilous as facing the dragons themselves. Determination alone would not be enough. Only the rarest blend of talent, perseverance, and luck could carry him through. But he was resolved. If this was the only way to save his friends, he would see it through, no matter the cost. Lucian's voice was steady. I learn magic quickly. Arafcelia frowned. But dragon-slaying magic is on an entirely different level. He cut in, unwavering. Given my magical knowledge and aptitude, I refuse to believe I can't master it. And if it really proves impossible, there's still time to find another way to defeat the dragon and claim its crystal. She hesitated, then pressed the other concern. What about the transformation you mentioned? Becoming a dragon isn't exactly harmless. Lucian shook his head. To truly transform, you must cultivate draconic power to its absolute peak, to the point that it completely rewrites your body. But my physiology isn't straightforward. It's infused with the bloodlines of every clone. I doubt any draconic energy could fully integrate with all those differing strains. Even if it could, the process would take years, possibly a decade or more. By then, I'll have more than one solution. Remember, an advanced animagus can shift from a fully dragonized form back into a human at will. That's nothing like Eleftheria's man guise. She may look human on the surface, but in essence she's still a dragon. Her senses, her physique, even her tastes remain draconic. She doesn't lose her dragon nature just by changing shape. Lucian discovered that mastering the animagus transformation offered extraordinary advantages. By perfecting the ritual, a dragon could assume human form so completely that he truly became human, mind, body, and soul. Even more remarkably, Lucian learned he could stave off the dragon's primal urges by infusing himself with an equal-level draconic bloodline during the shift. This meant he could switch between forms at will, human to dragon and back, without the usual side effects, and without draining his core dragon power to force the change. Armed with knowledge of ancient dragon-slaying magic, Lucian realized he could combine the strengths of 3 dragon types. The mystical magic dragon, the relentless fire dragon of the Harry Potter realm, and his own world's dragon. The result would be an animagus dragon unlike any other, stronger, more adaptable, and free of common draconic weaknesses, such as the crippling vertigo creatures often suffer when traversing great distances. In this new form, Lucian would wield unmatched draconic power while retaining the finesse of a human mind. Chapter 295, The Choice of Dragon Power, Third Update. 1 month later, within the vaulted halls of the Dragon Magic Guild, Eleftheria studied Lucian in awe. "You truly are a prodigy," she said. "It took me 3 years to master the fundamentals of dragon-slaying magic, and you've done it in just 1 month. Your heritage must be extraordinary." Lucian, the rare feline mage, merely inclined his head. He wasn't human. No one at the guild had ever seen his kind before, and it was easy to assume he possessed some uncanny magical gift. "Perhaps," he replied softly. Yet the truth was simpler. Lucian owed his rapid progress not to innate talent, but to strategy. In the past month, he had activated every one of his clones' minds in turn, directing them all to study the theory of dragon-slaying magic day and night. That relentless focus, rather than any mysterious lineage, had carried him through 3 years' worth of coursework in an astonishing few weeks. Lucian barely had time to register Eleftheria's incantation before a swirl of light whirled around them. In a heartbeat, the world shifted, and they stood at the gaping mouth of an immense underground labyrinth. "Welcome to the Earth Dragon's Great Labyrinth," Eleftheria said, gesturing into the vast, shadowed tunnels. "Inside, you will draw directly on the Earth Dragon's power to ignite your own Slayer magic. Once it takes hold, you will stand as an Earth Dragon Slayer mage. You'll even be able to feed on the earth itself, literally consuming soil, to amplify your magical strength." Lucian stared into the darkness. Why must it always be a dragon's power? Why can't it come from anywhere else? Eleftheria stepped closer, her eyes soft but firm. "There are 3 ways to become a Dragon Slayer mage. You can teach yourself, as you have, by tapping a fraction of a dragon's power when you cast your Slayer spells. You can learn directly from a dragon, which means the creature actively infuses you with its essence. Or you can implant dragon crystals in your body and slowly absorb their stored energy. But in every case, the source of true Slayer power is an actual dragon. Magic can't be drawn from nothing." He swallowed. "That's how I became Falong's Slayer, by secretly siphoning off some of his power." Eleftheria nodded. "Exactly, but what you stole then was only a taste. Here, before the Earth Dragon itself, you'll claim its essence openly, and far more completely than you ever could in secret." She extended her hand toward the labyrinth's forbidding entrance. "Step forward when you're ready. Your trial begins now." Lucian had learned everything he knew about the Black Dragon and the legendary 5 dragons from Falong. In return for sealing the Earth Dragon, Falong agreed to let him remain in the castle to study Dragon Slayer magic. If Lucian mastered the theory, he would finally be able to draw on the Earth Dragon's power directly. Just absorb its essence at the seal's threshold, Falong had told him. Once he was sent to the seal's chamber, Eleutheria vanished in a swirl of runes, returning to the Dragon Guild's magical array. But Lucian ignored her parting instructions. Instead of waiting, he knelt before the sealed Earth Dragon and closed his eyes, channeling every scrap of knowledge he'd gained from his month-long tutelage under Eleutheria. Dragonkind and their slayers, he'd come to understand, were bound by ancient laws of power and blood, and with each theory lesson, Lucian's confidence grew. Originally, 6 dragons had escaped from the eastern continent to the north: the gold, wood, water, fire, earth, and moon dragons. Of those, the Earth Dragon was the weakest, hardly an impressive prize, and certainly not the first dragon Lucian would have chosen to challenge. But Falong's seal lay here, and only earth magic could unlock it. Even though the Earth Dragon's element offered him no unique affinity, Lucian steeled himself. No matter the cost, this final step would make him a true dragon slayer. Lucian knelt on the scorched earth and scooped up a handful of dry soil. He let the itty powder slide past his teeth and into his throat. It was crude, barely more than dirt, but it pulsed with enough residual magic to bolster his slaying spell. Even this low-grade infusion sharpened his aura, reminding him that raw materials, no matter how unrefined, could still tip the scales in a battle against dragonkind. His goal was clear: fuse his slaying magic with the essence of either a fire dragon or a wood dragon, transforming himself into a fire dragon slayer mage or a wood dragon slayer mage. In both the Middle-earth and the wizarding realms he'd studied, every known dragon crystal bore the mark of fire. If this world followed suit, weaving fire dragon energy into his own spells would catapult his power to unheard-of levels. Attempting a water dragon fusion, he judged, would almost certainly backfire. Clashing elemental signatures risked a total collapse of the enchantment. As for gold, the golden dragon's gifts remained an unsolved riddle. Even Erevcelia, whose lore was as deep as any scholar's, couldn't recall its true name. Without that, no tracking spell could pinpoint its crystal. He'd also learned whispers of a moon dragon, but its elemental affinity was a mystery, and every divination he cast came up empty. Perhaps it was extinct, sealed away, shielded against scrying, or dwelling in a realm beyond his reach. With too many unknowns and too few certainties, Lucian set the matter aside for now, content to master the flames first before chasing more elusive draconic powers. Lucian weighed his options carefully. Choosing the wood element made perfect sense. Wood fuels fire, amplifying his flame magic with a potent synergy. It would bind him to the fire dragons of the parallel worlds, granting access to both Fire Dragon Slayer and the rarer Wood Dragon Slayer spells. On top of that, wood symbolizes life, promising a dramatic surge in vitality. With that boost, he'd no longer fear the dangerous backlash of goblin magic, and if he ever overextended himself, he could feed on ancient thousand-year-old trees to recover in no time. Moreover, the elves of Middle-earth were already tutoring him in life magic. Possessing a wood dragon slayer's physique would only accelerate his progress. Of course, theory and reality often diverge, but Lucian was prepared to find out exactly how far the wood path could carry him. His real challenge, however, lay ahead, drawing draconic power from the legendary 5 sealed dragons. Even if he didn't slay them outright, merely brushing against their dormant essence would be a formidable task. His plan was simple, but risky: sneak close to their sealed forms and siphon whatever dragon energy he could. If it worked, the rewards would be beyond anything he'd ever imagined. Lucian paused to consider his options. Even in the worst-case scenario, he still had the sealed Earth Dragon's power at his disposal. He could always return to its resting place and draw upon its strength legitimately. If surviving on nothing but soil was what it took, so be it. It wouldn't kill him. As he grew more powerful, he might even attempt to fuse multiple dragon powers, perhaps evolving along the same path as the legendary Black Dragon, one that devours all magic and converts it into raw draconic energy. Erevceria's account had explained the Black Dragon's astounding resilience. It simply ignores incoming spells. Suddenly, Lucian understood why Gildart's devastating crush magic had left the Black Dragon completely unscathed. The moment the spell reached its hide, the dragon absorbed the magical assault, as though swallowing it whole, and Gildarts' strike had been reduced to nothing more than an ordinary punch. Realizing this, Lucian knew the only way to bring down a black dragon was through pure physical force. No other tactic would penetrate its defenses. In addition to this critical insight, he had also managed to gather clearer, more detailed information about dragon crystals, mysterious relics rumored to hold the concentrated essence of draconic might. With these revelations in hand, Lucian felt the path ahead growing firmer under his feet. By embedding a dragon crystal, a mage needn't spend years mastering Dragonslayer magic. The crystal itself grants draconic power at once. But there's a trade-off. The crystal suppresses the dragon seed, so no matter how far one's magic grows, a full dragon transformation remains out of reach. In theory, then, only Lucian, Natsu, and Gajeel could one day become true dragons. Laxus would be limited to a humanoid dragon form at best. That also means if Lucian never plans to complete his dragon metamorphosis, if he's content using only his animagus abilities, he can always halt the change by embedding a crystal before the final stage. By contrast, a dragon slayer like Laxus who removes his crystal loses all access to dragon slayer magic, a disadvantage Natsu and Gajeel don't share. Reveal direction. Ignia, Lucian whispered, tracing a rune in the air. The spell flared to life, conjuring a glowing golden arrow that hovered before him. Spreading his wings, he launched into the sky and followed the arrow's flight, hot on the fire dragon's trail. Chapter 296, Lucian versus the Flame Dragon, Update 1. Ignia, the fire dragon, was Lucian's first target. The moment he heard that name, he couldn't help but think of Ignor, Natsu's adoptive father and fellow fire dragon. The resemblance in their names nagged at him. Could Ignia and Ignor be related? If so, tapping into Ignia's power might be far easier than he'd imagined. A day later, Lucian stood at the northernmost fringe of the North Continent, where volcanic peaks smoldered beneath roiling clouds of ash. To his surprise, he spotted a fortified city rising from the blackened landscape. "A city here?" he murmured, narrowing his eyes at the stout walls and jagged towers that seemed carved from basalt. Guided by the lingering echo of his tracking spell, he approached the gates. Though the ramparts rose high above him, the streets inside appeared nearly abandoned. No chatter drifted through the air, no torches burned along the parapets. Lucian pressed a gloved hand to one of the stone blocks, feeling its heat through the cracks. Ignia must be hiding within these walls. With effortless grace, he folded his wings and landed softly on the scorched ground outside the main gate. He paused to steady his breathing, every sense on alert. Then, before he could make his next move, someone materialized directly behind him. Lucian halted in the grand plaza of Flame God City, his heart pounding as fiery runes flickered in the air around him. "Who are you, and what brings you to my domain?" boomed a powerful voice. Lucian spun around to find a young man standing before him. A sun-shaped tattoo glowed on the center of his chest, and waves of scorching magic radiated from his body. So this was the Flame Dragon, Lucian thought. No mere mortal could wield such formidable fire magic. Only a true dragon in human form could match this aura. He forced himself to remain calm. "Pardon me," Lucian said, keeping his tone respectful, "but are you Mr. Iguni?" At that name, the stranger's amber eyes narrowed with interest. He crossed his arms, the air shimmering at his fingertips. "You know my name? It seems you've come here on purpose. I take it you're not another would-be hero looking to claim Falong's bounty and die for it." Lucian stiffened. If he admitted he'd accepted that century-old contract, a fight would be unavoidable. He quickly changed course. "Actually, I came seeking someone else. Do you know Iguniru?" The question made Iguni's expression darken. You know Iguniru. And my father? Who are you, boy?" Lucian met his gaze steadily. "My name is Lucian. I've heard tales of both of you, and I need your help." Iguni's eyes flicked skyward, as if weighing the stars themselves. Flames danced at his fingertips, yet he said nothing, his silence more daunting than any roar of fire. Lucian knew Falong all too well. He had engineered the Earth Dragon's defeat at Falong's hands, carved out the vast subterranean labyrinth that bound the 5 dragons, and plotted to resurrect the Dragon King Festival, to reshape every human in the northern continent into a dragon. He also understood how little Falong truly knew about the 5 dragons, and had no idea about the bond linking Falong to Igunilu. Lucian clenched his fists, heart pounding. Damn, they're actually father and son. That means this must be Natsu's brother. There's still hope. A spark lit in his eyes when Igunilu admitted he was Iguni's father. Seizing the moment, Lucian smiled. Actually, your father adopted a son named Natsu, he said smoothly. I'm proud to call him a close friend. Iguni sneered, the contempt in his voice sharp. You mean that human brat from 400 years ago? I never expected him to still be alive. His expression hardened. Don't presume you'll earn my friendship simply because you know Igneel. Dragons are lone hunters. Father and son share nothing but blood. And that human, I despise him. If he still draws breath, I'll gladly burn him to ashes. Lucian's heart pounded as Igneel loomed over him, eyes blazing. No, the great dragon rumbled. I should burn you, my friend, to ashes first. Lucian froze. He'd never realized how fractured the dragon's father-son bonds could be. And what did Igneel mean by calling Natsu a child from 400 years ago? Could Natsu actually be older than that? Memories of the guild's civil war flashed through Lucian's mind, how Natsu had been unable to breach the magic barrier. Was there really something ancient at work here? But there was no time for questions. In a single motion, Igneel hurled a torrent of emerald and gold flames straight at him. Let's see how well you stand up to a real dragon's fire, Igneel challenged. Lucian's first instinct was to apparat to safety. Instead, he squared his shoulders and drew his wand. Armor of Aegis, surround me! A shimmering shield of arcane energy sprang into being, crackling with protective runes. For a split second, Lucian dared to hope it might hold. Then Igneel's inferno crashed into the barrier. The runes bubbled and split apart under the heat, and the shield dissolved in a torrent of steam. Lucian stumbled backward, his cloak scorched and his skin stinging from the residual heat. Gritting his teeth, he readied himself. Whatever came next, he would not go down without a fight. This was the first time Lucian had ever found himself in such a dire situation. In the wizarding world, the shield charm is renowned for its near impenetrability. Everything short of the killing curse bounces off it. And with Lucian's own magical power already magnified tenfold by this world's extraordinary wand, his shield should have been unbreakable. Yet here he was, watching helplessly as Ignea's flames licked away at his defenses. What made it worse was that Ignea hadn't even assumed his dragon form. This was the weaker, the human version of the fire-breathing beast, and it was still powerful enough to scorch through Lucian's shield. A fresh surge of searing heat forced him to stumble backward. Instinctively, he flexed the retractable claws he'd grown into atavistic feline digits. Plasma electromagnetic cannon, Lucian cried, voice echoing over the roar of magic. A blinding column of superheated plasma, capable of slicing through mountains, hurtled toward Ignea with unstoppable force. The impact ripped him off his feet and sent him crashing to the ground. You cat, you're surprisingly entertaining, Ignea hissed, sparks dancing across his smoldering skin. Suddenly, fire flared outwards, enveloping the plasma beam at point-blank range and isolating it against his burning body. Lucian's heart pounded. He had unleashed one of the most devastating spells he knew, and yet this foe, even in human guise, seemed ready to shrug it off. The real test, it seemed, was only just beginning. Lucian watched Ignea advance, his roaring plasma column sweeping everything before it. He knew ordinary spells stood no chance against the flame god's defenses. If he stayed on the defensive, he'd be overwhelmed and thrown out of the game entirely. He needed something bigger. I suppose there's only one trick left, Lucian murmured to himself. He drew in a steady breath and called upon the secret discipline he'd mastered in Dragonslayer's downtime. Super magic fairy law. His hands wove an intricate pattern in midair. Immediately, a blinding white radiance flooded the battlefield, coalescing into a massive magic circle suspended above the ruined spires of Flame God City. Runes glowed and spun, channeling raw arcane energy into a single, towering column of light. With a thunderous crack, the column descended, enveloping Ignea in its brilliance. For 3 heartbeats, the air shivered under the spell's power, then the light snapped away. When Lucian's vision cleared, Ignea stood at the circle's center, clutching his side. A gout of blackened dragon's blood burst from his lips, and his once imperious composure cracked. Veins stood out on his scaled forehead, and his wings drooped in pain. You're unhurt, Ignea rasped. He stared at Lucian with a mixture of awe and fury. No one's ever wounded me in over a century, until now. Igneous row shook the chamber. I will burn you to ashes, he bellowed, unleashing a torrent of searing flame. The heat was so intense that the air itself seemed to warp. Then, in a blur of motion, he charged straight at Lucian. Lucian braced himself, but when the firestorm cleared, he was unscathed. Ignea's eyes narrowed in confusion. That blast cost me a third of my energy, and it only left a singe mark, he muttered, shaking his head. This makes no sense. Retreat! Seizing the moment, Lucian drew a small, polished mirror from his belt. Lips barely moving, he whispered the incantation. The mirror's surface rippled like molten silver, then billowed outward in a swirling portal of light. Before Ignea could recover, Lucian stepped through and vanished. Chapter 297. Lucian, the Wood Dragon Slayer. Second update. Ignea snarled, "He's gone." By the time he looked up, Lucian had already vanished into thin air. Grabbing the mirror that had clattered to the ground, Ignea examined its surface. Every trace of magic had been scrubbed away. He narrowed his eyes and muttered, "Space magic, huh? I'll remember you, little cat." He'd been far too careless. Who would have guessed that a mere kitten could wield such formidable power? Ignea flexed his arm, testing the shallow pain of his only injury. Had he been in his true dragon form, Lucian's attack wouldn't have even left a scratch. But lately, Ignea had sensed the ominous presence of Acnologia, the black dragon, stirring in the northern continent. He dared not risk revealing himself by transforming. Rumor held that the 5 great dragons commanded power equal to the black dragons. But the dragons knew better. Their strength might buy them an escape, but it would never be enough to kill Acnologia. At least, not in their current state. With a final glance at the now blank mirror, Ignea vowed to learn more about this mysterious wood dragon slayer before their next encounter. Lucian let out a low whistle. Sealing all 5 dragons can wait. He slipped through the mirror space and emerged in the nearest city, stepping out of a polished surface as if climbing free of a glass prison. With a thought, he dispelled the mirror magic and began a rapid series of short-range teleports, each jump farther from the flame dragon's reach, until he was certain no lingering tracking spell could follow him. Only then did he finally allow himself a steadying breath. Tonight's battle had cost him dearly. To scratch Ignea, even in her human form, with the fairy's law, he'd poured a third of his life force into the spell. Against opponents of equal strength, that technique drew almost no vitality. But Ignea had been leagues more powerful than any foe Lucian had faced before. Draining 1/3 of his life essence had been the only way to measure her true might. At his current rate of regeneration, he knew it would take nearly half a year to recover fully. And yet, the knowledge he'd gained made the sacrifice worthwhile. He flexed his shoulders and squared his gaze on the horizon. Next, let's find the other 2 dragons. Having gauged the flame dragon's capabilities, Lucian's hopes of defeating the remaining winged titans had all but vanished. Instead, he resolved to observe them from a safe distance, learn their habits, discover their strengths, and then, if need be, retreat to more modest quarry. After all, being an honest Earth Dragon Slayer didn't sound half bad. Lucian followed the tracking spell's guidance first to the water dragon's supposed lair. When he arrived, the enchanted arrow froze over a vast expanse of sea, signaling that the creature lay hidden in the deep waters below. Unwilling to pursue a battle beneath the waves, he had little skill in naval or underwater combat. Lucian reluctantly abandoned the search there. Redirecting his focus to the wood dragon, he watched the arrow's tip swing steadily toward a single point, a monumental mountain rising more than 8,000 meters into the sky. Built into its slopes were 5 human cities, impressive fortresses of stone and timber clinging to cliff faces and terraced ledges. At first, Lucian assumed the dragon must be sheltering within one of those settlements. Yet no matter how he refined the spell, whether broad or pinpoint, the arrow remained fixed on the mountain as a whole, never on any individual city. Puzzled but undeterred, Lucian summoned a gust of wind beneath his feet and flew to the summit. He was about to cast a detection charm when a sudden, overwhelming shock coursed through him. For a long moment, he could only stand there in stunned silence, the truth of what lay before him pressing in from every side. Lucian pressed his hand against the mountain's rough face and immediately felt it. A pulse of primordial life force, thick with draconic power, surged up his arm. It was Arar, Evolution. The wood dragon wasn't hiding somewhere inside the height and shadow of these peaks. This mountain itself, towering over 8,000 meters into the sky, was the dragon's body. 8,000 meters, the very scale of Everest. "Is it asleep?" Lucian murmured, closing his eyes and reaching out with his psychic senses. Deep within the mountain's living core, he sensed consciousness slipping in and out of slumber. The ancient dragon lay dozing. Lucian let out a low laugh. Sleeping was perfect, more than perfect. The 5 cities nestled at the mountain's foothills had thrived here for generations without stirring the beast. He could stay as long as he liked, quietly drawing on the wood dragon's energy. There would be no sudden awakenings to threaten him. Wood dragon power had always been his first and perfect choice. With the dragon in repose, Lucian prepared to settle in and begin the delicate art of absorbing its verdant, life-giving essence. There was no hurry. The giant beneath him would slumber on. Lucian lay prostrate on the mountain's summit, perched on the massive head of the wood dragon, and began weaving the incantations of the dragon-slaying spell. Drawing on the divine essence of the wood dragon god, he channeled its verdant power into every fiber of his being. As that draconic energy flowed through him, it slowly fortified his body and seeded the first beginnings of a dragon seed within his core. Forging a dragon seed is a painstaking process, taking roughly a month to complete. By contrast, dragon crystals can be implanted immediately, but at a tremendous risk. If a wizard lacks the necessary talent or physical resilience, the crystalline power will overwhelm them, tearing them apart from the inside. Makarov himself had often warned how harrowing Laxus's crystal implantation had been, an ordeal that left even the most battle-hardened onlookers holding their breath. Lucian's chosen path may be slower, but it offers a far safer and more controlled emergence of draconic might. Within days, the results were undeniable. Lucian's vitality swelled, his muscles grew denser, and his reflexes sharpened. Even the 1/3 of his life force he'd sacrificed to cast the fairy law spell returned in full after just 3 days of draconic infusion. With each passing sunrise, the power of the wood dragon god nested more firmly within him, marking the first steps of his true transformation. A month later, Lucian's eyes snapped open. The fragment of dragon scale embedded in his cheek flared to life, detached, and floated into the air. He opened his mouth and bellowed, "Dragon Slayer magic, wood dragon's roar." A swirling green vortex of energy shot straight upward. Without pause, Lucian drew a second breath and unleashed another mighty cry. "Dragon Slayer magic, fire dragon's roar." A blazing torrent of red and gold magic burst forth. He grinned to himself. "Just as I suspected, because wood fuels fire, my fire dragon slayer power has grown alongside my wood dragon slayer magic." In this world, Lucian had at last stepped fully into his identity as a wood dragon slayer. And thanks to the fire dragon crystals he'd absorbed from 2 other realms, he could now replicate Natsu's signature fire dragon slayer spells. His magical reserves, physical strength, and vitality had all surged to unprecedented levels. Lucian hovered above the mountain-sized shape below and sighed. After a month perched atop this sleeping wood dragon, siphoning off its draconic essence, he'd finally uncovered the unsettling truth. The creature wasn't merely slumbering under the guise of a mountain. It was far more dangerous than anyone realized. Lucian soared above the 5 cities, wings unfurled against the sky. It had finally dawned on him. The wood dragon's true power lay in absorbing every creature that settled on its back, turning men, beasts, and birds into living nutrients to fuel its evolution. Those cities, once thought of as sanctuaries, were nothing more than bait, carefully placed to draw humans in and feed them to the dragon. Peering down, Lucian's blood ran cold. Streets teemed with people who moved like marionettes, their eyes vacant and bodies controlled by the wood dragon's will. They were shells of their former selves, utterly subjugated. He clenched his jaw. "Not yet," he murmured. His own battle demanded attention first. Since challenging Ignia a month ago, Lucian had grown markedly stronger. Magic pulsed beneath his skin. The fairy laws, ancient formidable spells, lay ready at his command. Still, he knew one truth well. Even if he unleashed every ounce of his power to strike down the slumbering wood dragon, he would likely fail to kill it. At best, he would stir the beast from its rest, and to awaken the wood dragon now would invite disaster. Lucian folded his wings, determination hardening in his chest. He would bide his time, refine his strategy, and prepare for the day when he could confront the dragon without risk of rousing it. Chapter 298, The Disappeared Tianlang Island, Part 3. Lucian reappeared in the Grand Hall of the Dragon Array Guild. He wasted no time briefing President Arafcelia on everything he'd learned about the flame, water, and wood dragons. "President Arafcelia," he said, bowing respectfully, "with our current strength, those 3 dragons are simply unbeatable. But don't worry, give me a few years to grow more powerful, and I promise I'll return to seal all 5 dragons and finally complete this century-old mission." Arafcelia's eyes shone with excitement. "Lucian, what you've achieved is extraordinary. At last, we have reliable information on 3 of the dragons. That alone is a tremendous breakthrough." She leaned forward, barely containing her joy. Since sealing the Earth Dragon and setting this task in motion, every mage who dared to hunt the remaining dragons had perished, and none had returned with so much as a clue. Yet Lucian not only uncovered the lairs of the flame, water, and wood dragons, but survived the encounters and brought back invaluable intelligence. "Take all the time you need," she added. "Whether it's a few years or even centuries, the guild will wait for your return." Lucian stood before the glimmering portal, the last words of farewell still echoing in his ears. Mastering Dragon Slayer magic had been no small feat, and now that he'd claimed that power for himself, he knew his destiny lay even further beyond. Someday, he might rise to the very form of a dragon, his strength and lifespan magnified in ways he could scarcely imagine. But the time for dreaming was past. With a whispered incantation, he summoned the swirl of silver light that marked the apparition back to the fairy tale guild hall on the eastern continent. For now, sealing away the 5 dragons would have to wait. His first order of business was to return home, claim his place as guildmaster, and master the 2 remaining super magics that still eluded him. Only by steadily honing his skills and by rebuilding his guild's coffers could he hope to face the dragons again with any chance of victory. He'd been absent for over 2 months, and with Natsu, Gray, Urza, and the others throwing themselves into increasingly frantic jobs, he could only guess how battered the guild had become, and how pockets of the treasury might have thinned under the strain. Lucian winced at the thought. If he delayed any longer, the funds he'd spent his life helping to amass could vanish altogether. At the same time, halfway around the world in the hidden chambers of Hogwarts, Lucian's magical clone was preparing for its own transformation. Having already unlocked Dragon Slayer magic in this realm, it was now on the brink of completing the Animagus ritual, the final step toward merging man and dragon in both worlds. One gate closed, another opened. Steeling himself, Lucian stepped through the portal and back into the chaos that was fairy tale. Lucian had always known that magic had its limits. Although successive apparitions could carry him home in a dozen jumps, each teleportation only worked to places he'd already visited. Flying unfamiliar skies was the only way to reach new lands, and it had taken him 3 full days to cross from the eastern continent to the north. Now, on December 20th, X784, after more than 2 months away, he stood before the doors of the Fairy Tale Guild. A triumphant grin split his face as he pushed them open. "I'm back," he crowed, eager to share the fruits of his journey. He'd done it, become a true dragon slayer, and delved deeper into the secret history of the dragon clans than anyone had in centuries. But the guild hall was dead silent. Not a soul stirred. He stepped inside, scanning every shadow, then closed his eyes to tap his psychic senses. There, no presences, living or dead. The air felt empty, hollow. Lucian's heart clenched. Something had gone terribly wrong. Lucian knew that whenever something big was happening in the guild, nearly everyone would be out on a job, and only a handful of mages would be left behind to guard the hall. He closed his eyes, reached out with his senses, and called silently for the tracking spell. Track Makarov Drayar. He opened his eyes. Nothing. He frowned. No sign of the master. Track Urza Scarlet. Track Mirajane Strauss. Track Natsu Dragneel. Track Macau Conbolt. One after another, the spell fizzled into nothing. He bit his lip. Then, on the final attempt, something clicked. A faint trail shimmered into view. Lucian's wings unfurled, and with a powerful push, he was airborne, cutting through clouds at his top speed. "This is the direction to Tenru Island," he murmured, guiding himself toward the glowing waypoint ahead. Within minutes, Lucian recognized the curve of the coastline and the cluster of towers rising above the treetops. Tenru Island, the sacred ground of Fairy Tale, also known as Fairy Island. Legend said that ancient fairies once danced among its forests, and that the founding master of Fairy Tale was born here. His tomb lay hidden somewhere in the heart of the island, a silent monument to the guild's origins. Lucian's heart pounded. Whatever was happening back at headquarters must be serious. As the wind whipped past him, he braced for what awaited on Tenru Island, ready to face it head-on. Lucian hovered above the sea, watching the distant horizon. Thanks to the first president's powerful enchantment, only Fairy Tale wizards could normally breach this barrier. Yet there, cutting through the waves, came a fleet of Magic Council warships, dozens of them, all bristling with dark sails and council emblems. He frowned. Since the Tower of Paradise incident, the original Magic Council had dissolved entirely. Rumors of a new council forming had reached him before he left for the northern continent, but he dismissed them as hopeful gossip. Now it was clear. The Magic Council was back in force. Lucian dove toward the largest vessel. He'd cast a simple tracking spell, and its faint glow had led him here. Landing on the deck with a soft thud, he found Macau and a handful of Fairy Tale wizards gathered around a glowing map table. "Macau," he demanded, brushing salty spray from his coat. "What's going on? Why is the guild deserted? Where are the president and the others?" At the sound of his voice, Macau's eyes brightened. Relief and excitement flitted across his face. "Lucian, thank goodness, we've been worried sick. There's a rumor going around that the president and Natsu are dead. None of us believe it, but you should use the tracking spell again. Maybe we can pinpoint them." Lucian's heart sank. "Dead? That can't be right. But if there's even a chance they're alive, we'll find them." Macau swallowed hard, his voice dropping. "People are saying the president and Natsu didn't make it." He glanced at the other wizards, whose grim expressions confirmed the nightmare. Lucian pressed his fists together, determination flaring in his chest. "Then we'll prove them wrong." Above the rolling waves, the Magic Council's warships loomed, and with them, the chance to uncover the truth. How is this possible? Lucian's eyes narrowed to slits. In a blur, he shot in front of Macau, extended his feline claws, and pressed them gently to Macau's forehead. Instantly, he plunged into the other mage's memories. 2 minutes later, Lucian retracted his claws and whirled back to the edge of Tenru Island. "You all stay here," he ordered. "I'll go see what's happening." It turned out that a whirlwind of events had shaken the Fairy Tale Guild during Lucian's 2-month expedition to the northern continent. Just over 2 weeks after his departure, Fairy Tale had formed an alliance with Blue Pegasus, Lamia Scale, and Kate Shelter to strike against the 6 magic generals of the 3 major black wizard guilds. Their combined force had prevailed, and in the aftermath, the Sky Dragon Slayer from Kate Shelter, accompanied by her magical cat, had officially joined Fairy Tale. Shortly thereafter, on the next full moon ship, Guildarts had returned to Magnolia to report the mission's success to Master Makarov. Only 3 weeks ago, a far more astonishing event had occurred. Every wizard in Fairy Tale had been sucked into the world of Edras. The realm Lucian now found himself in was called Esland, a parallel universe to Edras. Even more startling, Lucian, along with the Harpy and Charlelu, was actually a member of Edras's transcendent race. With that knowledge, Lucian squared his shoulders and prepared to uncover what lay ahead. Lucian, known within the guild as Mistgang, is in fact the rightful crown prince of the human kingdom of Edras, and in this world he bears an uncanny resemblance to Jalal. He journeyed here to thwart his own father, the Edrasian king, from unleashing the apocalyptic subspace magic called Anima, which would have converted every living soul in our realm into raw magical energy and siphoned it all back to his world. In the climactic showdown, wizards from Fairy Tale united their strength and ingenuity to dismantle the king's deadly scheme. When the dust settled, Lucian remained behind in Edras, ascending the throne as its new monarch, while the rest of the guild slipped back through the dimensional rift to our world. Just over a week ago, Master Makarov announced the next S-Class Wizard exam, and Natsu and the others eagerly signed up. Tenru Island, the guild's sacred training ground, was chosen as the testing ground. But now Tenru Island has vanished without a trace, and every fairy tale mage who set foot on its shores has disappeared along with it. What fate awaits them, and what new challenges lie ahead for Lucian and his comrades? Only time will tell. Chapter 299, Awakening the Firewood Thunder Dragon, Part 1. Lucian hovered above the shattered remains of what had once been Tianlang Island, his heart heavy with unanswered questions. All he knew of the island's fate came from a terse report sent by the Magic Council. During the exam held there, the guild had indeed fended off an assault by the Devil's Heart, one of the dreaded three dark guilds, but that confrontation had been only a prelude to the true horror. In the aftermath, every guild member and the island itself vanished, consumed by a single colossal black dragon. It struck without warning, ravaged the island, then disappeared just as swiftly. Despite 4 days of joint search efforts by the Magic Council and allied mages, no survivors remained. Lucian closed his eyes and whispered the name he had come to dread, Acnologia. He opened his psychic senses and began to sweep the ruined landscape below, piece by piece. In his heart, Lucian knew the odds were grim. Even if Makarov had unleashed every last ounce of his power to cast fairy law, he could not have hoped to stand against Acnologia's overwhelming might. And Natsu, and the others, he feared there was almost no chance that any of them had survived such devastation. Yet Lucian could not afford to give in to despair. Not until every corner of the island had been searched. Lucian frowned as he surveyed the scene. He'd already tried his tracking spell back at the guild. Nothing showed up. Still, he couldn't shake his concern for Makarov and the others. After a year fighting at his side, they'd become like family. He needed to know they were safe. Then it hit him. Wait, that's a fairy ball. His eyes went wide. He hadn't formally learned the fairy ball during his studies, but as a time magic apprentice he understood its principles. His earlier detection had picked up a faint temporal signature right around Tianlang Island. Could it be? The fairy ball was said to be the ultimate defensive time spell. It freezes the flow of time in a given area, rendering its contents invulnerable to any outside assault. If Makarov had mastered it in the heat of battle, he might have used it to shield the island and everyone on it from the Black Dragon's fury. That would also explain why Lucian's tracking spell failed. The entire place was locked inside the stasis field. But the Black Dragon had flown away days ago. So why hadn't Makarov lifted the spell? Was there some other purpose for keeping the island frozen in time? Lucian tapped his staff thoughtfully. He still had so much to learn about the intricacies of the fairy ball. Perhaps it wasn't a simple on-off charm after all. Lucian stared at the swirling temporal seal, determination flashing in his eyes. Perhaps, with careful study, he could uncover its secret and a way to break it. If his instincts were right, there was still a good chance to free everyone caught inside. Back aboard the Magic Council's warship, Lucian laid out the situation for Macau and the senior mages. As he spoke, a spark of hope ignited on their faces. "Lucian," Macau said, his voice steady, "before you departed, President Makarov entrusted you with the guild's leadership upon your return. With him and the others trapped by that time magic, you're officially our guild master now." Lucian met Macau's gaze and nodded. "I accept the title, but I'll need all my focus on this arcane puzzle. Macau, I want you to oversee the guild's day-to-day operations. My sole priority has to be unraveling this high magic and rescuing President Makarov and the others." Macau returned the nod without hesitation. The recent S-Class exam on Heavenly Wolf Island had drawn nearly every capable wizard in the guild, some as competitors, others as support staff. With so many of their best still tied up in assessments, Macau was now the strongest and most experienced mage available, second only to Makarov himself. As Lucian prepared to pore over the seal's intricate runes, a hush fell over the warship. All eyes were on him, and on the slim hope that this one breakthrough might save them all. Although Lucian wasn't the strongest fighter in the guild, his encyclopedic knowledge of every member made him the perfect choice to handle its day-to-day operations. Once he'd asked Macau to pay respects to the Magic Council on Fairy Tale's behalf, Lucian gathered the remaining wizards and led them back to the guild hall. Meanwhile, his counterpart in this world threw himself into researching time magic and the secrets of fairy orbs. In the Harry Potter universe, Lucian sat in a cold, drafty classroom, watching lightning fork across the sky. He knew the moment he'd been waiting for had arrived. Silently, he whispered the disillusionment charm, vanishing from sight, and slipped out the back door. He apparated to the edge of the forbidden forest, retraced his steps to the spot where he'd buried a crystal vial, and unearthed it with practiced care. Heart-pounding, he twisted off the stopper. Inside, the potion had turned a vivid crimson, a sure sign that his plans were unfolding exactly as he'd intended. Lucian let out a silent breath of satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. Lucian flew through the night sky, clutching the crystal vial, until he was well beyond the castle's anti-apparition wards. There, in a secluded clearing he'd previously concealed under an invisibility spell, he materialized. Without missing a beat, he drew his wand, pressed its tip to his chest, and whispered the incantation, Amato, Animato, Animagus, Animagus. The moment the last syllable faded, he downed the blood-red potion in a single gulp. A white-hot pain exploded in his heart, his pulse thundered, and raw magic flooded every inch of his body. He could feel his bones shifting and expanding, skin rippling as scales formed. In less than 30 seconds, the transformation was complete. Lucian exhaled, marveling at his reflection in a still pool of water. He'd become a dragon, and not just any dragon, but a dual-attribute beast whose wings spanned twice his former height. The dragon seed and crystal had shattered the limits of ordinary animagi, allowing him to assume the true shape of a legendary creature. A fierce excitement gleamed in his new, scaled eyes. It had worked exactly as he'd hoped. However, this dragon was neither Middle-earth's golden worm, nor Harry Potter's fire drake, nor fairy tale's wood serpent. Instead, it fused the most striking features of all three. Its scales gleamed a deep, vibrant green like the wood dragon's hide, yet its broad wings were tipped in burnished gold, the hallmark of the fire dragon of legend. At 500 meters tall, it dwarfed ordinary dragons, though it remained smaller than the ancient wood dragon, which had swollen to colossal size by devouring human prey for over 4 centuries after fleeing the eastern continent. Even more remarkable were its elemental gifts. This creature bore not just dual affinities for wood and fire, but a third spark of lightning. Though it could not wield the dreaded dragon-slaying magics, it crackled with raw arcane energy, capable of calling down thunder with a flick of its talons. In this draconic form, Lucian felt every vein pulse with newfound vitality. His magical reserves had swelled, and his strength reached heights he had never before known. Now, towering over the world in winged splendor, he was more powerful than ever. Lucian stared at the shifting sky overhead and ran through the possibilities in his mind. If he'd been able to assume this form back in Middle-earth during his duel with the magic dragon, he wouldn't have needed the 3 elf princes' aid. His sheer physical power alone could have crushed the beast, no spells required. Still, even now, he knew he wasn't ready to face the flame dragon in its true draconic glory. Battling it in human guise might be within reach, but up against its full dragon form? Impossible. Its unrivaled vitality only amplified the power of its fairy law magic to a level he simply couldn't match. And then there was the black dragon. That monster consumed every trace of magic it encountered, leaving Lucian's fairy law spells utterly ineffective. Defeating it would mean relying solely on brute strength, a daunting challenge, especially when its dark magic could penetrate his defenses. He couldn't shrug off its power or absorb it for himself. So for now at least, thoughts of hunting down the black dragon to avenge his fallen guildmates would have to wait. First, he needed to grow stronger and master this new form before taking on any dragon that could devour magic itself. Lucian paced the cavernous training chamber beneath the school, the very room he'd expanded countless times with his traceless extension spell. Here, amid swirling holographic enemies and shifting terrain, he'd hoped to refine the fairy ball spell. Instead, he found himself more tangled than ever. He stopped and ran a hand through his hair. Mastering the fairy ball spell was proving brutally difficult. Given his current skill set, even if he devoted every last scrap of magical energy to this one incantation, it would still take 7 or 8 years to master. He needed a dramatic shortcut, and that meant unlocking deeper secrets of time magic. Outside the Harry Potter world, the only place Lucian had a shot at that kind of knowledge was the Marvel Universe. In particular, he needed to learn from the one sorcerer who truly commanded time, the Ancient One, Doctor Strange's legendary mentor and the real supreme sorcerer of Earth. Most Marvel mages borrow and then return arcane power from demons across countless dimensions. The Ancient One was different. She drew upon those same extra-dimensional energies, yet she never gave them back. Her mastery of temporal sorcery and mystical balance was unique in all creation. Lucian gazed at a shifting portal in the simulation chamber's far wall, the gateway he'd built to bridge worlds. Summoning Doctor Strange, or better yet, the Ancient One, was his only hope. If he could study under her, perhaps he could accelerate his understanding of both time and the elusive fairy ball spell. Bracing himself, Lucian stepped forward. It was time to seek out the Ancient One and face the true test of his magical ambition. Lucian perched on the edge of the astral plane, reviewing everything he'd learned about the Ancient One. If any interdimensional demon ever dared to cross that sorcerer's threshold, the Ancient One would tear it apart without a second thought. Behind him stood not only the legendary Trinity of Vishandi, but also Eternity, one of the 5 great gods, granting him the power to traverse dimensions and absorb every school of magic he encountered. Lucian had begun to suspect that the Ancient One's true essence was far closer to a dimensional demon than anyone realized. After death, the sorcerer had bound himself to eternity and drifted across the multiverse, much like those fiends he now vanquished. If that was the case, many of his most astonishing feats, his mastery of time, for instance, flowed from his own nature rather than being borrowed from some higher power. These were only Lucian's theories, but one conviction anchored them all. The fundamental principles of magic remained the same in every realm. If he could learn the Ancient One's approach to time manipulation, he would shave months, or even years, off his own quest to master the fairy ball. Yet the very idea of appealing to the supreme sorcerer filled Lucian with unease. The Ancient One had a reputation for distrusting self-taught mages, especially those whose abilities hinted at demonic origins. Still, the potential gain was too great to ignore. After all, the sorcerer wielded the fabled Time Stone, an artifact capable of glimpsing past and future alike. It was entirely possible he'd already taken note of Lucian's exploits. Taking a deep breath, Lucian rose from his vantage and stepped toward the sanctum's towering doors. Whatever awaited inside, he was resolved to face it and claim the knowledge that could shape his destiny. Up until now, he hasn't made any move to seek Lucian out, so there's no reason to assume any ill will. As Earth's Sorcerer Supreme, Stephen Strange's duty is to defend the planet from invading dimensional demons. Ordinary human affairs don't concern him unless the world itself is on the brink of destruction. After all, he's human, not one of those otherworldly fiends. Even if Strange were to come into conflict with the Ancient One, he wouldn't be utterly outmatched, though her real advantage lies not just in her personal power, but in the 3 sanctums that suppress demonic magic. Any demon that escapes, its native dimension loses half its strength, and by the time it reaches our world, the sanctums sap it even further. That's how the Ancient One was able to defeat foes that would have been unstoppable elsewhere. It was for precisely this reason that Caecilius destroyed the sanctums before summoning Dormammu, and why Wanda's assault on Camartage was so focused on neutralizing those strongholds. Lucian, however, is an earth-born human, an experimental subject, perhaps, but in no way a dimensional demon, and thus completely unaffected by the sanctum's wards. Lucian had finally mastered his animagus gift. Now at will, he could shift into a dragon. His strength had surged, and the protective wards he'd woven around himself remained fully intact. He grinned to himself. First stop, the New York Sanctuary. He needed to meet the Ancient One. If the venerable sorcerer accepted him, all his lingering doubts would vanish. If not, at least he'd know where he stood. Lucian pushed open the training room door and strode out onto the campus grounds. Afternoon light filtered through sprawling oaks as students hunched over their desks in quiet concentration. In the past few months, the Superpower Academy had swelled in size. Ever since the Eye of Insight's plan to seize Washington had been foiled, and the school's existence splashed across every news outlet. Gifted individuals from across the globe had poured in. Some were children sent by hopeful parents. Others were adults shunned and displaced because of their abilities. Thanks to the professor's psychic screenings, those deemed fit had remained as students, instructors, or support staff. The rest had been politely turned away. What began as a hidden institution was now a true sanctuary for the extraordinary. At least here he didn't have to worry about being snatched by secret agencies for experiments. Lucian spread his wings, ready to fly to the New York sanctuary, when a brilliant rainbow arched overhead and Thor appeared on the lawn in front of the academy. "Good afternoon, Lucian," Thor called out. Lucian returned his smile. "Everything settled?" Thor nodded. 2 months ago, he had reclaimed his hammer, and with it the power Odin had sealed away. Since then, he'd been shuttling between the Divine Realm, the Superpower Academy, and Jane's apartment, and occasionally laying the smackdown on local criminal gangs. "It's all handled," Thor replied, and with a snap his Asgardian armor winked out, replaced by a sharp business suit. His hammer melted into a sleek umbrella. "There was some unrest in Jotunheim after Laufey's death, but I smoothed things over." He checked his watch. "Oh, 5 o'clock already. I've got to run. Jane and I are off to see the new horror movie, The Cabin in the Woods." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "The Cabin in the Woods, huh? Sounds fun. Enjoy the show." Thor gave a confident thumbs up and strode away, umbrella in hand. Lucian watched him go, a wry smile twitching at his lips. Invisible. Lucian whispered the ward and vanished from sight, then launched himself skyward, heading straight for the New York sanctum he'd seen in the movie. On screen, it sat at 177A Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village. He had no way of knowing whether that address held true in this universe, but if it didn't, he could always make for Kamartaj in Kathmandu or discreetly cast a tracking spell, though that felt impolite. Before long, he hovered in front of a 3-story brownstone townhouse. Its facade blended Victorian proportions with French Baroque flourishes, and a pair of steeply pitched roofs crowned the structure. At their peak, a circular 4-lobed skylight peeked out. Arcane wards rippled over the entire building, but Lucian's trained senses told him there was even deeper magic humming just beneath the surface. Ding-dong. He drifted down to the stoop and pressed the doorbell. The chime rang inside, echoing gently through the wards. Almost at once, the heavy door swung open. A tall, dark-skinned wizard in flowing robes stood there, his expression one of mild amusement rather than surprise. "Mr. Lucian, right?" the sorcerer said, stepping aside to admit him. "We've been expecting you. Lucian, the Supreme Master is waiting for you." Lucian's eyebrows shot up. The Ancient One had the Time Stone and commanded temporal magic. She could peer into countless possible futures, but she wasn't omniscient. After all, when Doctor Strange foresaw over 14 million outcomes against Thanos, it was because he'd cast a spell specifically for that clash. Otherwise, she too would have foreseen threats like Thanos' attack or the Scarlet Witch's fall. For her to know he was coming and to be waiting here meant she'd been watching him closely, just as he'd suspected, yet she'd never reached out until now.